Blacksmith of the Apocalypse. By Arcuser. Chapter 361. The Vessel. The moment Seth opened the book, an enormous amount of knowledge kept pouring into his mind. The principles behind making a golem, the theories behind automatons. He learned dozens of foreign circuits, formations, and enchantments. Finally, based on all this, came Al-Salzar's blueprint for her new body. Where golems had a core that their body was formed around and automatons an energy source and a control unit, the sorceress combined these concepts with his ability to infuse souls. In function alone, the token worked like a golem core, that materialized a flesh body, but a huge amount of Al-Salzar's power was sacrificed in the process. It was very inefficient. It was obvious that her idea was based on what happened with Evie. Permanent flesh on artificial bones. The problem was that she lacked Evie's immortal soul. This was why everything became a lot more complicated. The theory and knowledge made Seth's brain overheat, but together with a giant headache he also understood the brilliance of the sorceress. To give a rough outline, she created a way to use the technology behind automatons to produce a skeleton and turn the whole skeleton into a golem core. Of course, the whole thing only worked with someone like Seth who could bind a soul to a physical object in a way that turned the object into a substitute of a body. She had spent a long time watching the blacksmith work, to understand the underlying concepts even Seth had no idea of. Ugh! Now he knew a lot. And it came at the price of an almost unbearable headache. Even equipping the golden fleece, with its healing magic, did not soothe his pain. He could only endure until the knowledge had firmly taken root in his mind. For hours he kept tossing and turning in his bed until the headache finally reduced to a bearable level. His sheets were crumbled and drenched in sweat. He was completely exhausted. His mouth was dry, and his body felt weak. An overbearing growl could be heard in the room. Seth closed his eyes and didn't move. Again, a commanding growl echoed from the depths of his bowels. Hunger made his body move like a zombie. Or it didn't. Minas Mar, teleport me to the canteen. With disheveled hair, wrinkly, moist pajamas, and dried drool on his chin, the imposing Tower Master of Minas Mad appeared lying down on a table in the canteen. Surprised shouts and gasps could be heard as he had just crashed into the lunch break of the Oath Guard. Seth had not expected people to be present in the canteen. Mina and the others had told him about the Oath Guard, but it had not really sunken in, that there was now permanent personnel present in his tour. The domineering complaints of his stomach brought his mind back on track. He was hungry. Link? Are you there? He called out. The commotion had already spread to the kitchen, and the gourmet hunter had come out looking when he heard someone call for him. Seth! What happened? He exclaimed at the sight of the Tower Master slovenly lying on one of the lunch tables in the middle of food trays. I have a headache. I'm hungry. Please give me food. It's been ages since I had your cooking. Sure. Can you stand up? Let's go to the kitchen and I make you something fresh, he stammered to get Seth out of the situation. Although it did not look like the Tower Master cared, his reputation might take an even greater hit if he stayed here. Fine. Seth mumbled and flopped off the table like a wet towel, before slowly standing up like an undead. Here, try this. Link said when he put a dish in front of Seth. There were something like noodles and a finely cut piece of meat with a cream-colored sauce. The smell made his mouth water. He flinched when he took the first bite. The explosion of flavors hurt, but there was no stopping after he took the first bite. He did not gobble it down like usual. Seth ate slowly but persistently, savoring every bite. Ding! Your willpower has increased. +2. Ding! Your intelligence has increased. +1. To his surprise, his stats started rising from the food. Link must have finally managed to level up his cooking skills in the last weeks. Seth gained 4 willpower and 3 intelligence from the dish. Ding! Attack power plus 150%, intelligence and willpower plus 25 for 1 hour. Another message came after finishing the meal. The temporary increase in stats helped a lot with his headache. That wasn't the only thing. Despite the hunger he felt before, he was completely satiated with just this one dish. Link, did your cooking skill increase? He asked. Yes, it did. Thanks to the establishment of the Oath Guard I get a lot more varied ingredients which helps in farming experience with new recipes, even though their ranking isn't that high. That's great to hear. I feel a lot better now, thank you. Seth stood up and patted the hunter's shoulder. By the way, what was that dish? The tentacles of a mental squid and a fillet of a hypnotoad. They are only monsters around level 35, but with the right cooking method, they can still have a huge bonus even on people with a high level. Link explained happily. I see. Oh, before I forget it, I have some work for you. How about meeting me at the dismantling R later? Oh, I don't usually dismantle anything anymore. Monique hired some pretty talented hunters into the Oath Guard. But I believe you will want to dismantle these things yourself. The ingredients are plentiful and should be of high quality. Seth insisted, thinking of the giant snakes and apes. Okay, I will come there, when you need me, the gourmet hunter answered after a short silence. Seth stretched for a moment before teleporting back to his quarters to get dressed. He was finally relaxed enough to wear the simple casual clothes made in Deltan again. When he stepped out of his room he was greeted by a crowd of people. The information of his sudden appearance in the canteen had made the round and reached the lords of Minas Mar, who dropped whatever they were currently doing and assembled at the entrance of his room. Mina and Finn were immediately attached to him, happy that he finally woke up after several days. There were also Dohu, Evan, Linri, Whedon, Azul, the archer, and Lydia. When his eyes fell on the cybergoth his heart sank. She wore a dark heavy robe, and her hair was styled to hide the cursed scars. She looked a lot gloomier than he remembered. Although they had looked for ways to treat it before, there was no improvement while he was gone. But now he had a brainwave. Maybe the skills of the Golden Fleece could cure her affliction. It wouldn't undo what happened, but he hoped she could return to her cheerful self afterward. It's a little cramped on here. Why don't we go to the meeting room and talk there? Seth suggested, and the moved location. After everyone took a seat, the first thing he wanted to do was speak to Lydia. He was well aware that he might have been a little neglectful of her situation before. Seth had left looking for a cure to others. He had a lot of time to think during his travel and wished to treat the people close to him with more care. But before he could say anything, Monique bombarded him with a business report. He had heard a lot already from Mina and the others, but as his substitute, Monique gave a more coherent report on the recent activities of Minas Mar and the situation of Delta. There were also Mary and Jane to give updates on the more official proceedings. There was a lot to talk about and catch up on. Is it really okay for us to hear this? Maybe we should leave for this part of the conversation. Dohu suggested sensibly. He and some others present were not even official members of Minas Mar yet. Was it okay for them to hear this information? Oh, great, you are bringing that up. How about we start with that? Mary, could you get the contracts ready for our new members? Chapter 362. Captain of Team 3. See contracts. Azul stuttered. The Chimera had a hard time keeping up with the flood of information and new things she encountered since coming to the Magic Tower. However, the people treated her nicely, and there were none of those poisonous stares she had feared prior to coming here. She acted tough and confident, but for someone with almost no recollection of their past, the glances of people could hurt quite a lot, even if they did not say anything. Yes, so you can become official members of Minas Mar and get all the benefits that come along with it. Don't worry, it's just to make official what we already talked about. Seth had explained everything about Minas Mar to his new comrades on their journey. Now he just needed to explain it to Mary and the others so they could take up their role. Some of them were rather special. Whedon would join him in producing items for the shop. The blacksmith had insisted on recruiting the young dwarf. He was specialized in armors, which was Seth's least favorite activity. If Whedon could take over to make the armors for commercial use, and Cerberus would do the weapons, then Seth could take his time working on Alzalsar's vessel and other projects. After a lot of talking, Dohu had agreed to become an honorary member of Minas March. It was the best Seth could make the Tiger Man convince to do. It meant that Dohu was not a fixed member with rights or privileges, but more of a freelancer or a guest that would help if asked. The mysterious archer, whose name was Archibald, but preferred to be just called Archer, agreed to join the field service and raid high-level dungeons. On that matter, Azul would also be joining the field service for now. Later, when the Chimeras currently traveling with the rescue force arrived, they would get their own division among the Oath Guard. Evan agreed to directly join the Oath Guard. Seth offered him a special position to expand his work with mounts and pets. Since the young tamer wanted to try and breed the Titanoboas, Seth would support him wholeheartedly. He still pictured the whole Oath Guard riding into battle on giant snakes. Everyone was happy with their position until they came to Linri. Seth had promised Linri a carefree life in Delta. Like he promised, he offered her to be a guest and a monthly income to do whatever she wanted, but she denied it. But why? Seth asked surprised. I do not want to be just some freeloader. She had accompanied Seth along the whole journey from the stronghold to Delta. It had explicitly shown her that she was baggage the whole time. She had not shown her discontent, after all, it wasn't anybody's fault that she had no combat power. However, it didn't mean she would want to stay baggage now. She wouldn't rely on that flimsy promise she had forced onto someone in the spur of the moment. She had only spent a short time in Minas Mar, but she really liked this place. I would like to get baptized in the system church, gain a class and get a position fitting my abilities, she said confidently. Seth could only smile. He had been ready to indulge her for the help he had received, but she wanted to work. How did he pick up someone so reliable? If that is what you want, then I won't stop you. With that, Linri's contract was put on hold until she chose her class and entered the system. After certifying their relationship with Minas Mar, there was no one who wanted to leave because they might hear something they were not supposed to. There were some who would have liked to leave because it was boring, but they stayed out of courtesy. Monique roughly explained their action during the chaos in Delta, their rise in fame, and the establishment of the Oath Guard. At this time the situation in Delta had finally started calming down. Since the city did not need their protection anymore, Monique had already kicked off one of their plans for the Oath Guard. They had never wanted for the Oath Guard to be simply a private army to farm dungeons for materials. One of Seth's original thoughts was to set aside part of the Oath Guard as mercenaries that could be hired to accompany traders' caravans for protection. Technically, like how adventurers could be hired as guards through the guild, but without the guild as an intermediary. This way they would also be able to get business in places like Y-City where the Adventurer Guild lacked the standing for business people to approach them. Minas Mar offered elite teams of well-trained and equipped troops for hire. It was not only a good way to get money but also a way for the members of the Oath Guard to get some variation in their job. Not everyone wanted to stay guard and dive into dungeons for their whole life. This way the people interested would get a chance to travel around. The turquoise anvil was also doing very well, but the items Seth had left were almost sold out at this point and they really needed fresh supply. Lastly, their conversation came to Jonah, who was currently not present in their meeting. Monique shot a wary glance at the Tigerman, before she brought up the letter they had received from the Tijai girl. Seth frowned when he read the letter. He could feel calm reaction soothe his mind and lower his heart rate before he gave it to Dohu to read it. The usually calm Tigerman got bloodshot eyes and almost crumpled the letter when his hands balled to fists. And there has been no news from Jonah, yet. No, he wanted to contact us when they reached Beta. It had been a little over 2 weeks since they left. So, either he should call soon, or something happened. But what could happen to Jonah and 2 teams of Oath Guard in epic armor? True. What about you, Dohu? I would understand if you wanted to leave for Beta right away. No, I will stay and wait for a few days. You seem to trust this Jonah. I will set off, if there are no news in the next few days. Monique, do you think he can afford another team of the Oath Guard to send with Dohu when he leaves? Seth wanted to come along to save Drosy, but he was afraid Alzalsar would lynch him if he kept delaying the build of her vessel. He soothes his bad conscience with the fact that once he finished her body, he could ask her to help search for Drosy. At that point, she would have power close to the level she had as a lich. She would be a much bigger help than him. They talked for a while longer before the meeting ended with Seth finally handing out the new items to the rest of the lords. Tekker finally got a new set of epic and relic rated, but Seth promised him something even better once he had some time to work with all the stuff he brought back home. Items. Items pla pla pla. When everyone left, Seth remembered Lydia and ran out of the room to get her back. In the hallway he saw the cybergoth happily talking with Azul and Archer. She had easily befriended these new additions of Minas March. This gave him another idea. Lydia. Wait a moment. Could you come back? I would like to talk about something with you, he called out. Surprised, the young woman turned back. She parted with her 2 friends and came back to the meeting room. Lydia, how are you doing? He asked when they both sat down. Okay? I guess. Where did that suddenly come from? She asked surprised. It's just that I feel that I neglected your issue before, and I wanted to apologize, he said seriously. What are you saying? You were busy and I am not some helpless little girl. Letting me use the resources of Minas Mar to look for a solution is more than enough. He felt a little better when he heard that Lydia did not resent him. Well, anyway. Reason, or now I actually have to. The initial reason I called you is because I might have a way to cure your wounds. He had not finished spying when Lydia was already sitting on his lap, grabbing his collar. Her face was really close, and she stared him in the eyes. Really? You mean it? She asked excitedly. Like I said, maybe. I am not sure, we need to try it, to see. He explained to her a little about the golden fleece and she agreed that magic with that kind of background had a chance to work. Okay, let's try it, she said, turned around and started getting undressed with her back turned towards him. Why are you getting naked? Tae-hee, are you saying you are getting turned on by my scarred body? She teased. Don't worry, I won't turn around, it's just so we see if it really works. She turned around a chair and sat on it in reverse, offering her bare back to him. Roughly half of her slender, toned back was covered in dark, badly healed scars. They were still emitting a kind of miasma. Let's start with superior heal, he said and cast the spell on the young woman's back. The scars started recovering at a visible rate and Lydia let out a relieved moan. Everything looked good until the spell ended. The healed skin immediately started deteriorating as the wounds returned and the miasma resurfaced. I am sorry. I thought it might be enough, he said, watching Lydia whimper in pain. It's okay. I can take it, she said. She had been through this a few times already. Next, I will use superior purification. I sure it can expel the miasma. Seth said determinedly. The miasma was obviously the bigger problem. His confidence wavered when he used the skill, but there were no visible changes after using it. It became a little depressed. Seth was so sure that the skills would work. What's the problem? Lydia suddenly asked. I'm sorry. It doesn't seem to work. What are you talking? It became a lot better just now. Keep going. Surprised, Seth continued using purification. After the third time, there was finally a visible change in the dark miasma. With every casting, Lydia kept moaning ambiguously. Oh God, I think it's really completely gone. Lydia said with tears in her eyes. Seth finished it off with a superior heal, which made the scars vanish once and for all. Seeing the scars and pain gone for good, the half-naked Lydia couldn't stop herself from bawling in relief. Her face was covered in snot and tears, and she threw herself at him, refusing to release her tight hug. He could only awkwardly stroke her back. Arim, there, it's all okay now. He waited for her to calm down before bringing up the other matter he had thought about. Lydia, the other reason I asked you to stay back was to ask you a question. What do you think of becoming the leader of Team 3? Chapter 363. Golem Artisan. What did you say? Lydia exclaimed and Seth had to hug her tightly to avoid getting a full view of her body. Originally, the field service was made up of 2 teams, Yulecat's Fur and his party now led by Monique. However, it was always the plan to expand these teams, once the Oath Guard was founded. They were the high-level teams that would farm difficult dungeons for loot. Seth had seen Lydia getting along quite well with Azul and Archer, 2 of probably the most powerful new members. Since she managed to befriend them in a matter of days, why not offer him this position? Yeah, I saw you get along with Azul and Archer. With you, there are already 3. How about you choose a few people from the Oath Guard for a 3rd field service team, he suggested. Although she would not be able to join the lords who were defined as the founding members, being the leader of a field team was equivalent in status. This meant she had the authority to command and choose members of the Oath Guard for her team. It also meant she could ask Seth for personalized equipment. Previously, as a member of the Willis family, she was always excluded from the big decisions and never had a chance to prove herself. It made her double happy for the chance to shine in her new home. Yes. I will get to it right away. Maybe you should get dressed first. He commented, covering his eyes. PFF, don't act like that. There, I am all dressed, she scoffed. She said her goodbyes in a hurry and ran off to catch Azul and Archer. Seth looked after her for a moment. It was finally quiet again. He sat at the table and kept going over the things they had talked about and what he needed to do from now on. The knowledge he gained from the manual kept popping off new ideas in his brain like fireworks, but he couldn't stop thinking about one thing. Al, you will help in that matter with Beta, right? Yes. You can be there faster than 2 weeks, right? Of course. Is everything okay? Sure. It would be more believable if you weren't crushing the armrest right now. Oh. I'm just having a hard time convincing myself that not rushing off is the right decision. What are you worried about? You trust Jonah, right? And he has the Oath Guard with him. Once you made my vessel, we rush there in a matter of hours. The Lich kept urging him. Fine. He got up and stretched. Then let's get started on your oh-so-precious body. Seth had missed a lot of things and would have liked to relax for a few more days. Like visiting the Bard Academy, going on a date with Mina, or playing games with Finn. However, he couldn't calm down after reading that letter. Drosy and his people were in danger, but he couldn't just run off. If H couldn't stop thinking about the situation, he put his effort into solving it somehow. The blacksmith returned to his Seth cave after being gone for several weeks. Thanks to the maintenance system of Mina's Mar, there was no dirt or dust at all. It was a little surreal to him, that the workshop looked no different from the last time he was here. As if he had never left. Except for a meal with his friends, Seth spent the rest of the day here and worked on the blueprints for Alzalsar's new body. Using his blueprint skill he thoroughly planned through all the steps, memorized them, and tweaked them here and there. Ding! Your skill Blueprint Leave 4 has become Blueprint Leave 5. He heard the notification right after he finished completing his work on the blueprints for the new vessel. It had been ages since Blueprint had leveled up. Mostly because he had not been using it a lot ever since his skills had grown. Despite that, it might play a big role in the future, as Seth had decided to choose the trait Blood of the Inventor. With the new knowledge injected into his brain, he saw a lot of new possibilities for the future, aside from weapons. He remembered the souls he had collected back then when the caravan was attacked by the remnants of the theocracy. He had taken them because those people had begged for their lives. At that time, he had no other option to help them. Although the chances were slim, Seth thought the best he might be able to do was preserve their ego and turn them into an ego weapon. Now, he might be able to revive them as arcane cyborgs. This was why Blueprint grew in importance. The skill made especially the planning and theoretical testing of creations much easier. There was also the system guidance that could help him get used to the production process. After finishing the planning phase, Seth sat down and pondered for a moment, before finally selecting Blood of the Inventor as the trait of his class advancement. Ding! Your primary class has advanced. Ding! New skills have been added to your skill window. Please check. Ding! Because of the advancement of your primary class, some of your skills have gained additional options. Please check. Messages rang in his head. He lamented that there were no patch notes for changes like this. He needed to search for changes and improvements, himself. It was easy to see the new skills. There was the passive skill Engineer, which lent overall improvements to devices and blueprinting items that were neither weapons nor armor. The other new skill of called Golem Artisan. This was the skill that made him realize what the class advancement meant for a unique class. Since it was literally unique, one either created or inherited the class. The class advancement for Seth was a possibility to choose one of the paths his predecessor had already walked and unlock skills that were originally not part of the basic class. As an example, if Seth ever died and someone else became the Spirit Blacksmith, they would probably have Kin of Fire as an advancement option, as this was something not part of the base class, but a trait he attained through his own work. This realization came to him, because Golem Artisan was very similar to Al-Salzar's idea, but it leaned more into the direction of golems than automatons. Cerberus was most likely a product of this skill. The biggest difference was that this method was a lot easier. It implemented engraving the formations used on a golem core, on a soul. What kind of materials the body could be formed of, the intelligence of the golem, and the skills it would be able to use. The resulting golem's overall performance was solely based on the strength and quality of the soul used in the production. This method skipped all the theoretical stuff Al-Salzar had thrown at him, just like the token Seth had made. Technically, the token was an accidental implementation of this skill. The fact Al-Salzar was able to materialize her own, human body, just bore witness to her power as she managed to recreate the perfect body for herself. But just like the token, this method was very inefficient and squandered a lot of potential. The result would vary a great deal. In comparison, if Seth produced a vessel first, while the soul only acted as the control unit, the resulting strength would mostly depend on the materials used in the production. Two ways to a similar result. It reminded Seth of the difference between human and dwarven blacksmiths. Dwarves would swear on their skill and using the perfect materials for the best results. Humans on the other hand would find ways through technological methods to compromise for the lack of materials or skills. If one had a huge supply of strong souls where optimization did not make a difference, who would bother with intricate and time-consuming work? This made Seth think of his predecessor. Just what kind of person was he to have a constant supply of huge or high-quality souls, that he didn't bother with creating the vessel first? Seth did not think for even a second, that his predecessor did not think of it. You can think about dead people at a later time. Weren't you in a hurry? The lich pulled him out of his thoughts. She was right, it was not the time to worry about those things. It was good that he had 2 new skills that supplied him with knowledge and benefits. He could use any help he could get for Al-Salzar's body. Chapter 364. The Canvas. After Seth had understood the process of producing the vessel in all its details, he was ready to start the actual work. He was quite confident to be able to pull it off with a normal material. The problem was Al's insistence on using the body of Lehilaphon, the throne she had hunted, as the materials for her body. Like the body of the angel he had forged, it was not a material recognized by the system. This made it much harder for him to use it, as he had gotten used to knowing everything about a metal when he looked at it. The absence of this information made him feel as if he had gone blind in one eye. In conclusion, not being able to appraise it also meant the material was not in his material catalog, which meant he was also unable to use it in blueprinting, and he could not use the system guidance of blueprint. Although it felt awkward, it didn't mean that he couldn't do it. He just had to trust his experience and skill. He took out the body of the angel the sorceress had roughed up. From the outside, it looked like a heap of metallic feathers and eyes. However, when he started dismantling the whole thing, its horrific body came to light. Below the majestic-looking feathers were thick fleshy tentacles, covered in eyes. The body from which these tentacles grew was a faceted sphere with an eye on every facet. There were no orifices at all. It looked very disconcerting and alien once the feathers were plucked off. The next step was turning it all into a usable shape. Using pyrokinesis like a plasma cutter, Seth dismembered the eldritch horror into sizable pieces before bringing it all to his furnace. For the first time, Seth could really feel the changes that Kin of Fire brought with it. During the journey or fights, he never had the time to really concentrate on it. In the quiet environment of his workshop, with only the roaring of the furnacing in front of him, he could finally explore the change. In this quiet moment, he could feel a deep connection with the flame in front of him. Deeper than when he had just contracted it. It was a tangible bond, and he could feel the warmth and goodwill the spirit flame had towards him. The lack of system assistance in working with the divine metal further deepened this impression. He did not need the system windows and controls of the smelter anymore. He also didn't have to blindly trust into the color of the flame or the metal inside. Seth was able to precisely feel the change within the furnace as if they were part of his body. The temperature of the flame, the heat of the metal. And as he intimately kept interacting with the fire, he felt this bond strengthening. Unlike with pyrokinesis, which was mostly grasping and manipulating the shape of fire, it was much more like a communication. It was not measured by levels or other system metrics anymore, but Seth could feel it improving. As long as he kept getting used to it, he might be able to fuse it with pyrokinesis. His combat prowess would increase a lot. The deeper the bond, the easier it would become to call upon it in a sudden situation, without using magic. Despite missing the system assistance, he was able to precisely detect when the metal liquefied and when to pour it into the casting molds. It had something meditative, and it helped Seth finally, truly calm down after reading that letter. But it was more. He felt a pressure lifting from him he had not realized existed. It took him a while of sitting in silence until he realized that it was probably the after effect of calm reaction. Even though he had thought he had gotten through the past weeks quite well, it was mostly thanks to this skill, that he did not fall into a panic every 30 minutes. Now, in his meditation with the flame, these after effects dissipated. Without him noticing, it had become late at night when he put aside the last bar of the metal. Tomorrow we can start forging the parts of your body. I hope you are happy. Seth said tiredly. I am satisfied with your progress. Since Seth had just returned, it would take some time for him to return to his full duty as a tower master. After a short meeting in the morning, he was free to keep working on the vessel. But instead of getting right back to it, he took some time to take a look at the situation in the tower. He found Finn, playing with Pip, Ruby, and the other children. Seth was coaxed to play along for a little while before he went to visit Allison and Evie in the laboratories. He learned how unfair it was to play catch against the fairy. She was merciless in her pursuit of victory. At least, she didn't show Seth any mercy. Nothing much had changed in the laboratories, where Allison and Evie spent most of their time locked up. Allison showed him a row of new inks she had developed, and as they were talking, Seth remembered the books given by Master Mountain. He explained what had happened to Allison and handed her the book on foreign alchemy to study. Evie was still ecstatic that her spatial beacon had actually worked. Listening to her talk about everything that could have gone wrong, made the blacksmith a little queasy. Maybe he had trusted this whole thing a little too much. He was glad that he had left the chimeras and refugees with the rescue forces. With that many people, something terrible might have happened. His last halt was a visit at the herb garden where he met Bilko and Otto the pharmacist. The latter excitedly talked about the skills that the children and especially Pip had shown in the care of plants. Otto even went as far as to ask to be in charge of the group of children in Mina's march. It was not only that he was impressed with their skills, but he wanted to teach them and learn from them at the same time. Seth was not too familiar with the quirky pharmacist, but he was brought in by Bilko. As long as Pip agreed to it, there was no problem. Seth had lunch with Mina before he finally returned to the workshop where he found Whedon waiting for him. "Whedon? What are you doing here?" he asked the young dwarf. "Hello Tower Master. I came to work since it was decided yesterday," the dwarf answered eagerly. "Just keep calling me Seth, Whedon. I like your enthusiasm, but you can still take a few days to break, really." Seeing the disappointment on the dwarf's face, made him feel bad. It was like looking at a sad puppy. How much did this dwarf like to work? "How about this, let's construct you a personal workshop down here. It should take a day or two at max. Then you can work on your own accord as much as you want," he suggested. It would take long for the Mantanay spots of the tower to carve out and refine another space for a workshop. When he mentioned it, Whedon's eyes lit up. "My own workshop?" "Yes." "Then, take another 2 days off until it's ready." The dwarf nodded and ran off. Seth really did not know what his deal was, but he would not complain about motivated employees. Before he forgot it, he returned to the control center to order the build of the new workshop. Then, he finally returned to the workshop to start his work on the vessel. Although the day was not young anymore, the blacksmith did not have to work until deep into the night to finish the first step. This first step was rather simple and only needed him to skillfully forge a simplified humanoid skeleton. It took him a moment to get used to the properties of the foreign metal, but he already had a similar experience with the body of an angel. Once he got used to the properties of the material, there were no huge technical challenges for him. Especially since he didn't have to study some rotten bones to feed the shape into blueprint. Although he couldn't use blueprint to make the final product, he could make some of the more difficult parts from a different material to get a feel for it, before doing it with the angel's metal. Since it was mostly forging, his forte, it did not take long to finish the basis. The real challenge would be the next step, carving all kinds of enchantments and arrays onto this base. Chapter 365. The Picture, the Heart. Seth spent the second day carving enchantments into these mechanic bones. Channels for power, arrays for movements. It had been a long time since he spent this much attention purely on carving circuits at his enchantment table. Lately, demonic ballads and inscriptions had become the focus of his works thanks to his second class. Now he realized that there were special things that could not be accomplished with those skills. Demonic skills were rather organic and varied greatly in their potency, but the effects were often very special and strong. These traditional enchantments on the other hand were very technical, they had a predictable effect and a stable output, they were more suited for this kind of work. For a similar reason, Alzalsar's initial manual did not include any smithing ballads. In the future, it would be on Seth to look for ways to incorporate other techniques for better results. There was a lot of inspiration floating in his head as he worked on refining the metal skeleton. The circuits themselves were not very complicated, there was simply a lot, which was why it took a lot of time. It took him a whole day to imprint the rudimentary circuits that would enable a wide range of smooth movement. Otherwise, the result might look like a Yankai animatronic covered in a layer of flesh. But they did not take on optimizing and mechanic tasks. There were circuits to lessen the weight and to strengthen the overall power and speed of the vessel. Despite being made from a heavy, unknown metal, the sorceress would feel no difference in her body thanks to the overall augmentation. Once again, this was only possible because it was L. The energy cost of all these circuits combined would easily drain a big soul. In the case of the sorceress, it was only a fragment of her natural mana regeneration. The variation of how to infuse the soul was also specialized for the super powerful sorceress. It was another point he would have to keep in mind once he tried to repeat this for other souls. He finished the step of circuits on the next day when he carved all the channels and control arrays that all lead to one place where they finally combined in the core interface. This was the last step. Creating and inserting this core, the heart of the vessel, and the refuge of the soul was the last step. It was also the only step that included smithing ballads and inscription. It was to apply the oath restriction onto the core. Are you ready, Al? Yes, let's do this. Wish me luck. With this, Seth removed the Lich's soul from the token. The epic ego soul glistened in his hand. This was really the most vulnerable any being could be. Even someone as strong as Al-Zalsar, if Seth had wanted to, he could have squashed the soul and ended her life. When they first met, she did not really have a choice but to trust him. Now, she herself asked for this. It was an unprecedented amount of trust. One Seth intended to reciprocate. Of course, he had doubts about giving a super-powerful, ex-lich, an unfettered body. This was probably the reason she herself had added the oath restriction in her own blueprints. In the case that she went against Mina's Mar, her core would be ejected, just like the oath armor that became unusable. However, Seth wanted to take this leap of faith. The sorceress had helped him a lot ever since they met. Although Al-Zalsar's original manual involved the oath restriction, Seth planned to leave it out. Worst case he would have to fight Al-Zalsar. Crafty failsafe gave him the semblance of confidence if it really came to a fight between them. But he hoped that would not happen. He wanted to trust her. Removing the bone plate from the token, he started refurbishing it into the refuge of the souls, which would then be the main part of the core. It was a very fine work as he turned the bone plate into something resembling a neuron with many connections for the control interfaces. This neuron was then inserted into a shell of adamantium to protect it from any harm. It was the only other metal introduced to the vessel. When he inserted this core into the metal skull, he heard a notification. Ding! You have finished a divine vessel. Unable to calculate achievements. Ding! Your skill Blacksmith, Craftsman, Leave 1 had become Blacksmith, Craftsman, Leave 3. Ding! Your skill Enchantment, Craftsman, Leave 2 had become Enchantment, Craftsman, Leave 3. He was confused about the first notification. Was it because he had used a material not recognized by the system? The second and third made him happy, both skills had gained a huge amount of experience. Blacksmith had already been close to Leave 2, which explained why it directly skipped it. All that was left now, was inserting Al-Zalsar's soul into the vessel. This procedure differed from when he created armament, or when he created Evie's hands. From what Seth understood, the soul was usually spread across the body without a specific core. The most natural connection of body and soul was similar to when Seth infused a soul during the forging process and homogeneously melded it with the material. In the case of Al's vessel, there was the core, much similar to a lich's phylactery holding a major part of her soul. When compared to this, Seth spread only a small portion across the artificial skeleton, directly connecting the core with the control interface and 360 different nodes all across the body. This could be the foundation for later iterations, but Seth was sure this kind of setup only worked for a tremendously powerful soul like that of the Lich. If he wanted to revive someone using an ego soul, there was a lot he would need to make differently. He gained many new insights and learned a lot as he strained his mental energy to shape and connect the brightly glowing soul to its new body before finally inserting her into the core and sealing the skull once and for all. Then he summoned the waters of Styx. It was one of the few changes he had noticed. It was hard to overlook. What was once a barrel of cold water to quench weapons in had taken on a much more abstract form. It was a giant sphere of water that floated just centimeters off the ground. This was the first time he used it, since his class advancement. Seth lifted Al's new body in his arms and stepped to the sphere. When he got close, it was as if the sphere read his thoughts and stretched out towards the vessel in his arm. Gently, the metal skeleton was sucked into the water without the blacksmith having to do anything. Looking at it, floating in the middle of the sphere, Seth got a notification. Ding! Your skill Soul Infusion Leave 5 had become Soul Infusion Leave 6. Ding! Title, Creator gained. You have successfully created an artificial life form. Plus 10 to all attributes of your inventions. Ding! You are the first to create artificial life. Unable to calculate achievements. Ding! Subject has rejected the effects of trait, Olympian myths. Ding! The effect of your skill Crafty Failsafe has been strengthened by the effects of Engineer and Golem Artisan. Ding! Your skill Crafty Failsafe Leave 6 has become Crafty Failsafe Leave 7. The sorceress was released from the liquid sphere. She elegantly landed on her feet as flesh grew and covered the metal skeleton at a rapid pace. In a matter of seconds, a spicy sorceress stood before him in the nude. Stop staring. There is nothing you don't know, she teased him as she struck poses and stretched, testing her new body. If you stopped flaunting it in front of me, I might be able to look away. Seth mumbled. He fetched a set of clothes for her, but when he turned back to her, she had already summoned her standard airy and revealing robe. Chapter 366. Beta. I feel something is missing. You didn't add the restrictions, she asked, surprised after she was done adjusting. No, I didn't. Why not? Because I wish for you to stay with us at Myanmar, but I do not wish to force it onto you. What good is keeping you, if it was against your will? I just hope that, if you really leave, you will help us travel to Beta first. A flood of words fell out of Seth's mouth. I see. Then I will leave right away, she said and turned around before Seth could utter another word. He could only look at her back in disbelief as she walked to the exit of the workshop, where she halted at the door. With her hand on the door handle, her shoulders started shaking. PFF, ha ha ha. Look at your sad face. Did you really think I would just leave like that? She fell into a fit of laughter. Ha, jokes aside. I won't leave the one place worth my presence in this world. Don't worry, she said after calming down. With a kind smile, she gently grasped his shoulder. I have no reason to leave. This place has the facilities, the opportunities, and the manpower I need, she said seductively. Seth, who had just calmed down, was overcome with a sense of impending doom. He just hoped it was not his manpower she was planning to exploit. A prayer went out for the guys in the red light district. So, how is the new body? It's very good. Better than being summoned through that token, and definitely a lot better being a lich, she said while her hands were roving her own body in a way that made Seth's heart race. Now then, are we setting off for Beta right away, or do we wait to see if we get a message from Jonah? She got to business with her hands on her hips. First, I need some sleep. Then we should talk with Dohu to decide our departure. Seth mumbled before porting to his bed. Now that Alzalsar was here, the tension of the last few days fell off him and he could finally get a few hours of good sleep. Beta. Jess and James were currently hiding in a grocery store. Their armors were covered in blood, scratches, and some deep gashes. They were heavy, panting from the fatigue. The streets outside were flowing with blood, fire, and monsters. Just what was wrong with this place? They had joined Lord Jonah on his quest to save the Tija after that letter had arrived. Their journey had been peaceful with only few monster encounters. It was so smooth that they even arrived early in Beta District. Like Y City, Beta was one of the 3 districts that were in contact with each other and one of the 2 who fought against the maritime empire that had tried to invade the continent from the southern coast. Their first step in Beta was gathering information as they traveled through the cityscape in the direction of B City, the capital. The letter did not give much information on the cat people's current location, so they had to carefully follow their trail. It was about 3 days after they entered when they saw signs of unrest. More and more people were on the streets, as they got closer to B City. Refugees talking of beasts in the capital and terrible battles. However, there was nothing official, the leadership stayed mum and from what they heard could not be reached. On the 4th day, people insisted that the capital had fallen. From the few soldiers and guild that tried to organize the evacuation efforts, they found out that the higher officials of the places they came through had already fled. They decided to stay for the moment. Jonah wanted to call Myanmar, but the phone network had gone offline. Suspicions of sabotage were rampant and unfortunately, they had not taken any magical communication devices with them. Finally, Jonah decided to join the local forces to help in the evacuation in exchange for access to a still functioning landline of the military. It was one of the few methods that had enabled the 3 districts to communicate shortly after the start of the apocalypse. It was a military secret, but they were hard-pressed for manpower and the higher UPS were already gone. Following the promise, they stayed in a satellite city close to B City and helped evacuate and escort the civilians for another 2 days. This connection also brought them more information about the threat that supposedly appeared in B City. Shocked, they found out that it was not just B City. The few military scouts that reported spoke of anything southwest of B City already being wiped out by the enemy forces. Their only valid guess was that something happened in B City that disabled any warning systems before the maritime empire invaded once again. This news could not have been worse because, from the information they gathered themselves, the most likely place the Tija were apprehended and held captive was exactly this B City. This meant that even if they had been alive, the chances of them still being well in this situation had become terribly slim. Not to mention that the danger level of their mission had risen dramatically. Jonah needed to desperately report back to Myanmar, but when he insisted on using the landline, the military officer they had spoken to begrudgingly admitted that it had been offline for several days already. Angrily, Jonah and the teams of the Oath Guard set off immediately. If he really had to make someone use home call to report back, he would do so after getting a good look at the actual situation himself. It had not taken long for the situation to devolve into a mess after they entered the vicinity of Beta. The city was a complete war zone with people fighting monsters, people fleeing or getting mercilessly slaughtered. The monsters were no stranger to some among them. They were obviously known to Jonah. They really were the troops of the Maritime Empire. Giant humanoid fish berserkers, covered in grey and blue sharkskin. Their dead eyes only looking for an opportunity to kill and spill blood. Confronted with this sight, Jonah did not stay silent and commanded the Oath Guard to help and to save as many as possible. In the end, they were separated by the flood of beasts. The creatures were much stronger and more intelligent than expected. Although the Oath Guard, decked in epic armor, could hold their ground for a long time, the overwhelming numbers had chipped away at them until their formation finally broke. This was mere minutes ago. Jess and James had managed to escape by the skin of their teeth. There was no telling what happened to the others and Lord Jonah. What should we do? James finally asked after catching his breath. Should we just return to Delta? I bet the other already used home call to escape this nightmare. James was tired and ready to call it quits. He just wanted to get home while he was still alive. Jess on the other hand stayed silent. A tiny flame was ignited in her eyes when she heard James' second sentence. No, we stay, she said determinedly. Yeah, a lot of the others probably returned in the chaos. I am sure nobody will blame them too harshly. But think about it, we came here with a mission. We came to save people. The Tower Master and the Lord's cherished ambitions were swinging in her voice. With most of the others gone, if we manage to find them, or at least return with definite information on their status, we gain all the credit. Jess, have you lost your mind? Don't be so overly dramatic. We have been in a worse situation than this. Remember that time when we delivered those letters to Y City? We had to sneak past that giant tinkle of ice trolls. Back then we didn't have any awesome equipment or high level. We don't have to fight them, just sneak past, and take a look around. James was not convinced. We can just teleport back the moment it gets dangerous. Fine. But promise me, that you will really use home call the moment the situation turns sour. No heroic. Great. Let's get going. Chapter 367. Beta, 2. The duo's destination was the headquarters of a pharma giant Zen Biologies. For what it was worth, the days they had spent with the military were not a complete waste of time. They were the best source of information to track the path that the cat people had taken. This company was the biggest suspect. They had found a load of information about visitors from different races vanishing, and all were somehow connected to this place. It was just that law enforcement lacked evidence and interest in investigating these cases. Maybe Zen Biologies even had a deal with the government beforehand. Who knew? It was the best place to start looking. Neither Jess nor James had the map skill, but they had their phones and a map of B City on them. Despite GPS not working, they were able to find their way. What they saw on their travel was horrifying. The streets were filled with corpses and monsters gorging on them. It was a grim reminder that the apocalypse was far from over. Even a place that seemed stable like Beta was overturned in a matter of days. Obviously, the two did not travel on the streets. In the time before they became adventurers, they were forced to take part in many less than legal activities. One of the less honorable skills they had acquired was the ability to travel unseen through the rooms and gaps between tightly packed buildings. If the opponent you hide from was on the streets and in the skies, it was much easier to escape through the living space they could not enter so easily. Running through hallways, breaking through doors, jumping across alleys from one building to the next. Although neither of them chose a thief class, their talent was obvious. Completely unseen, they managed to use the building themselves to sneak all the way to their destination. Zen Biology's HQ was an imposing skyscraper a little off of B City's center. What completely surprised the pair was not the chaos on the streets here, but the lack of it. In front of the doors of the building were piles of monster corpses, and strange humanoids guarded the vicinity. They had some features like beast people, but they seemed off overall. There was something uncanny about the way they walked and looked. Let's observe the place for now. Judging by the pile of corpses, those things are not weak. Jess just silently nodded at James's suggestion. They were currently crouching in the third story of the building opposite of the HQ similar to their target. This was once the building of a big company, but the giant skyscraper was now empty, except for some piles of rotting meat. Although the streets were patrolled by the fishy invaders, the building was left empty. Most of their forces were probably occupied with chasing the refugees. They did not bother to search already pacified areas. The only ones stubbornly holding their ground were those disturbing humanoids. It reminded them of some of the smaller scandals that came out right before the system came. Back then the media was filled with reports about the worsening climate and the catastrophes. Scandals and suspicions about human experimentation and illegal genetic manipulations happened but were only secondary to the overall dramatic situation back then. Only after seeing these now, did they remember those footnotes from that almost forgotten time. It felt like decades had passed since they saw the news on the television or smartphone. Do you think they found a way to use magic for gene splicing? James muttered. The hell? Where did that come from? What do you know about gene splicing? I saw it in a cartoon one time. James blushed a little embarrassed. I think I saw that one, too. I really liked its dark tone. I agree this looks just like in the show, except, maybe those things are mindless clones or something. That would explain why they move and act so awkwardly. You are right. Since they were just sitting there and had nothing better to do, they kept coming up with theories about what those things might be, while observing Zen biologies. The objective was easy to sum up but hard to execute. Infiltrate the building, look for information on the kiddies and then get the fuck out. There was no way for a rescue operation with just the two of them, even if they found the cats were inside and alive. They did not dare act until before thoroughly scouting out the building. For this, they kept changing locations to get a view of every detail and entrance to the building. It took them a few hours to thoroughly observe and note down the movement of the guards and the entry point of the front, right side, and the back with the delivering entrance. They had just changed locations to the building to the left of the HQ when they heard a commotion at the entrance. At first, they thought it was just another batch of beasts attacking, but they could soon hear the cries of weapons clashing with each other. It couldn't be a monster. Finally, their curiosity won, and they came to the front to see what was going on. There, down on the street, was a dark figure flickering between the eerie guards and dispatching them with powerful sword strokes. Despite their lack of emotion, every time they faced the demonic mask their movements would halt for even just a moment. But it was enough time for the wearer to bring them death. It was Lord Jonah valiantly pressing on against the waves of guards that came flooding from inside the building. These things grew more and more grotesque as time went on, and with their deformities grew their power until even Jonah was getting pressured. We should help him. James finally uttered. You think we can? Look at the situation. With those kinds of enemies, we will be more of a burden than some help. But we can't just watch this go on. Exactly. I say we go in. Lord Jonah is pulling out huge masses of beasts. With him as a bait, there shouldn't be too many still inside, right? I guess you are right. To fight Lord Jonah like this, they must be their elites. Even if they aren't, if we can get info on their strength, it will already be a huge contribution. The best case would be if we can confirm the whereabouts of the kiddies. James nodded grimly. Although it was against his wishes, they would have to leave the distraction to Jonah. He was still observing the street while Jess was working on creating an entry point for them. With the current chaos on the ground, there was no way they would use one of the original entrances. Most of their scouting had been for naught thanks to Jonah's actions. Jess cast a flame lance and shot it at the glass facade of their target. It was something they had used a few times in the last hours. It was interesting how silently the penetrative fire magic could create a hole into the glass of a skyscraper. After casting the advanced magic, she climbed on James's back, who proceeded to leap across the alley with a mighty jump and entered Zen Biology's building through the hole the mage had created. Except for the noises from outside, the inside of the building was silent. It seemed completely deserted. They checked the rooms in the surrounding, but they were mostly empty offices and laboratories. The power was out and none of the computers they checked worked. Everything here is covered in dust. They did not just leave yesterday, she muttered, rubbing some of the dust between her fingers. Up or down? James asked where to go next when they reached the staircase. If you want to hide something, it's common sense to put it underground, right? She said, implying to go down. But those monsters are flooding from the lower floors. We could use the elevator. But the power is oh, you mean we should rope down the elevator shaft? James forced open the doors of the elevator upon which they stared down the dark abyss of the shaft. But if they wanted to hide something, this probably won't get us there yet, but we can reach the ground floor and cellar without encountering an enemy. Once again, she climbed on his back before he jumped into the shaft to grab a hold of the elevator cables. Thanks to the epic gloves he wore, he felt nothing as they started sliding down the cable. With his increased stats it was easy to control their descent along the rough cable. This way they came as low as the building underground parking lot where they exited the elevator shaft. The lot was also completely deserted, only dark emptiness greeted them here. And now? Explore, what else? James had just found the kitchen when Jess called him over. On the ground floor, she was crouching at the door that led to a hallway. At the end of the hallways was the lobby, which was filled with beasts. Just where are those coming from? James asked. They had not seen any other living thing in this place, except for these beasts. Suddenly, they heard a snarl behind them in the hallway and hurriedly pulled their heads back. They gently closed the door and hid. In tense silence and with bated breath, they heard the steps of a group of beasts single-mindedly trudging toward the lobby. It felt as if their hearts would jump out of their chest as they listened to the group pass the door they hid behind. Where did those come from? Didn't you check back there? I did. Everything was empty. Tisk, let's better look again thoroughly this time. If they were not here before, that must be the place where they come from. Chapter 368. The Burrow. The search was tense as they were aware that Lord Jonah was constantly fighting outside the building while they were squandering time to find the place where the monsters came from. After a while that felt like an eternity, they were lucky. They had just entered the underground parking lot when they heard a loud rumbling. Quickly they hid in the dark and observed where the sound was coming from. When the noise stopped, they heard a sliding and suddenly a group of monsters entered the lot from a solid wall. The way down had been here the whole time. Hidden behind an illusion. The duo waited for the monsters to leave before they sprinted up to the wall. Sliding their hands across the smooth wall, they could clearly feel the contours of the elevator door. They were lucky it was only an optical spell. Once again James forced open the elevator doors. Behind the illusionary curtain, they were greeted by the interior of a large freight elevator. It did not have any buttons for different floors, only a down button. After pushing the down button, they waited for the empty elevator to travel down, before jumping on its roof. It traveled down for several stories before coming to a halt. They waited on the roof for something to happen, but there was nothing. The shaft lacked any other exits and they had to crawl out through the elevator. Before them was a long hallway with many reinforced doors at the walls. It didn't give them a good feeling at all. The warrior and the mage hurried down the hallway where they could see a door ajar. Coming closer they saw that it was like a vault door with several steel bolts that would lock with the surrounding wall, but the stood left ajar and they could simply push it open. The scenery changed tremendously behind this thick gate. Broken doors, walls covered in blood, and lifeless bodies lying around. When they shove open the door, the body that had clung to the door even in death, fell before their feet. He wore a white coat, and his face was a grimace frozen in fear. Shit! James mumbled. They had been worried about cameras and guards, this on the other hand seemed a little more difficult than they thought. They just wanted to find a group of kitty people. Why was it so difficult? Okay, let's go. No time for self-pity. We have to find someone to interrogate. Jess said. Do you really think there is still anybody alive? Well, there has to be at least one person that keeps tabs on the outside and sends those monsters out. Makes sense, James mumbled, and they started searching the facility. Empty offices, empty laboratories, empty cells, and bloody stairwells. They found rooms with huge tubes of nutrient solutions and things like prison cells. Operation rooms with many alien-looking devices and rooms that seemed like living rooms in a daycare center. None of the places looked much better than the first hallway. It was clear that whatever they did down here was off-putting at best. From the documents they found, they could garner that this place was called the Burrow, an underground facility of Zen biologies. The place they were currently in was just one of the many different sections of research. Despite all the blood and signs of fighting and hurried escape, they did not meet any monsters or living people. They had just entered a hallway full of offices when they heard someone over the intercom. Hey you two. Who are you? How did you get in here? An insecure female voice asked. We simply followed the trails of monsters. James blurted out and got Jess's elbow in the ribs for it. Arim, this doesn't seem to be the place where anybody would want to be. We are looking for some people. If you help us, we could get you out of here. Why you can help me get out of here? Jess couldn't suppress a complacent smirk. She had read the situation right. Of course, we can. But it's not for free, you understand that, right? What do you need? I have nothing, Kyaa. While Jess had been talking, James looked for the office and broke through the door. Please don't hurt me. I didn't do anything. It was a woman in her mid-30s. She was wearing a lab coat and a pair of round glasses. Her long brunette hair was braided in a ponytail. That's something interesting to say. What could you possibly have done that would give us reason to hurt you? Jess swaggered into the room. Silence was the only answer as the researcher's fearful eyes kept focusing on the two fully armed intruders. Okay, then let's start with the most important question. The answer might bring you out of here alive. A glimmer of hope lit up in the woman's fearful eyes. Where are the kiddies, I mean the Tijat? The woman suddenly blinked in surprise. Are you talking about Drosy and his kin? Wait, are you the people little Lonnie spoke about? Drosy, Lonnie? Jess was confused. Wasn't Drosy the guy Lord Jonah spoke of, and Lonnie that the girl that sent the letter to the boss? James helped her memory. Really? You were always better at remembering names, anyway. Yes, we are looking for Drosy and Nanny. Lonnie the researcher corrected. Lonnie. Yes, I said that. Since you know them, they were here, right? Obviously shit went down in this place. Are they still alive? I don't know. Shortly after we helped send that letter, management reassigned them to a different facility. The woman said remorsefully. They were not here when everything happened. Okay, so they are not here. Do you know where they are? No, I'm sorry. Can we leave now? We can't leave without knowing where they are. Jess insisted. I could find out if I get access to the intranet. Don't tell me we have to get you to somewhere else in this hellhole. James lamented. Unfortunately, yes. I can only access it through a computer in the administration. Jess, I don't know what happened here, but we should get Lord Jonah first. First we would need to find a way to shut off the constant flow of monsters and Laura the woman answered at the intense stare of the mage. Laura here probably can't do that from here either. Wait, are you saying that the test subjects keep being sent to the surface? Yes. Then someone in management still has to be alive or something took control there, Let's talk on the way. Lord Jonah is still fighting outside, we don't have time. Upon leaving, Laura had a minor breakdown, but couldn't vomit as her stomach was completely empty. Laura had no idea of what exactly was going on. She was completely surprised when they told her that the city above looked similar and was flooded by monsters. She herself had been stuck in her office for days, too afraid to leave it. According to her, it all began with a security breach somewhere in the research and holding section several stories below, where James and Jess first entered. She was one of the staff tasked with observing the behavior of their guests and had no knowledge of what was going on down there. Zen Biologies was not this shady when she started working there. They had been doing completely normal behavior studies and gene research in the burrow. That was before the apocalypse hit. Laura knew there were darker sides to the company, but she had not been involved with those. They had always been top secret and done behind closed doors. With the system and magic entering the world, things changed. Especially the war brought those dark sides to the surface. Suddenly they were involved in research to cross humans and other races to create something stronger. At that point, it was too late to leave. She had seen colleagues who tried to quit vanish after stating their opinion a little too loudly. All they could do to help was send letters for those like little Lonnie. But until now, no other guests had friends in Earth. At least none that ever came looking for them. She kept informing them as they walked. So, you have no idea what happened here? Really? Jess kept poking as they walked past bodies and dried blood. Really? There was an evacuation notice, but before I could even leave my office, I heard screams in the hallway. I am a coward. I just locked my door and hid under my desk. I heard a lot of terrible things from the hallways, but nothing ever entered my office, and I never had the heart to look. The researcher led them through several hallways until they reached a staircase. The whole complex was silent and devoid of life. Just up the stairs is the administration. As long as we find a working computer, I can log into the intranet. Chapter 369 The Bureau, too. The administration was a big room of cubicles, and the place was completely smashed. It looked like a big fight had happened here, with many corpses of guards in matching armor being strewn all over the place. It was the first sign of actual battle, instead of indiscriminate slaughter. She looked at the chaos and the team of guards on the ground. These were not the ordinary people she knew, who would check their IDs and write entry protocols. These had been the elites of Zen biologies she only saw once in a while when they brought a new specimen to the lower levels. None of the computers here are still intact. Laura cursed. Jess and James followed. What now? We could try to get to the system administrator's office. But seeing the elite guards are dead, there might be something terribly strong that took control of that place. Let me guess, if we want to shut off the supply of monsters brought to the surface, we also need to gain control of that place. I could probably shut it off from there. Jess and James looked at each other. Although their equipment was damaged, they had recovered to peak condition during the observation. They should be able to take on a few of those monsters. All right, lead the way. Laura had never been to the administration before. She too only followed the way signs on the walls. But they were almost unnecessary. They just had to follow the bodies of slain guards. The way to the admin's office was covered with them. I'm having a bad feeling about this. James mumbled. These dead guards did not seem weak at all. Also from the signs of fighting on the floors, the walls, and even the ceiling, the battle must have been intense. Is there no other way? Jess asked Laura. The only other thing I could think of is the archives. But there is only a low chance we will find the information and there is no chance to help your friends outside. She answered apologetically. The only other place with similar authority would be the management. However, if those people already evacuated, then there will be nothing left working. A fight it is then. What is your class? I am my class's researcher. It's the higher job of a scribe, so you have no combat power. Got it. James summed it up. Jess and James got in the mindset of imminent battle as they carefully snuck around the hallway. After a few minutes, they could hear beastly snarls from up ahead. Looking around a corner, they finally saw the enemy. Humanoid fish. The troops of the Maritime Empire. They had big, bulky humanoid bodies with disproportionately huge piranha heads. Jess and James had only heard stories of these beasts from Y City and B City. Seeing them with their own eyes, made them feel even more disturbed. There were 5 of them sitting in a group in front of the admin's office. It seemed like they were guarding the outside while feasting on the human bodies strewn around. The sharp teeth, jutting out from their mouths, easily cut through meat and bone, without making so much as a breaking sound. You are a researcher, right? Do you maybe have a skill to tell us their level without alarming them? Jess whispered to the woman in the lab coat. Ah, yes. I can do that. They are all in the range of leave 60 to leave 65, she said after peeking around the corner. We should be able to take them, if there are no others. James estimated. A minute later Jess stepped around the corner and opened the battle with a compressed fireball. The surprised fishmen were hit and the fireball exploded before they could react. Right after the fireball came James charging at the group, attacking the ones at the edge of the explosion. One quickly lost his fish head, but the second had the time to react and block the warrior's attack with its trident. The fish locked eyes with James before shoving him away, right into the attack of a third fishman. But James did not spare this fish a glance and got ready to block the attack of the one in front of him. The next moment the third fishman was thrown to the ground, with the jaws of an armor wolf clamped around its throat. While James and his wolf fought these two, Jess disabled the last one standing with a fire lance. It took a few minutes and some more scratched on his shield and armor until James finally managed to finish his fight. Despite having the element of surprise on their side, only one fishman died from the explosion, while the rest had mostly minor injuries. James had just finished killing the last one, when a jet of concentrated water shot past him, aiming for Jess. Even though Eustace, the little magic owl, erected a shield in time, Jess was thrown back and crashed into the wall behind her. You are indeed strong. Might you be friends of the man fighting outside? An androgynous voice asked as a figure stepped out of the office. Its limbs were slender and the movements elegant with an otherworldly bearing. It was a mere man. These were like the nobility of the Maritime Empire. Their body was mostly humanoid and covered in a kind of shark skin with colorful patterns. Their faces had fish-like aspects but still held an alien beauty. The one in front of them had a head covered in fins which made it look like he wore a feathery headdress, while his body was covered in a thin robe that did not cover much. Without answering, James swung his sword, but the merman lifted his arm, and the weapon was blocked by a magic shield. "Quite the short temper, simply because I took out your rearguard," he said arrogantly and struck out with his fist. A loud gong could be heard when the fist was blocked by James' shield. The sound was accompanied by the attacker breathing in sharply. "What a sturdy!" He quickly ducked away as a fireball came for his head. Jess, who the merman thought incapacitated, had easily tanked the impact thanks to her epic equipment. The robe alone, which was a mix in technologies between Nico Booz and Seth, was stronger than most epic leather armors found in the dungeons. "You," the merman exclaimed, but he did not have much time to talk. A sword was aiming for his neck, but when he wanted to dodge back, his leg was fiercely bitten by the armor wolf. He attempted a matrix dodge to avoid the sword but lost his balance and landed on the ground. In a panic the merman shoved the armor wolf who tried to maul his face away, only to feel a sharp pain in his legs. He cried in agony and dark blood covered the floor. James had used the chance and decisively cut off the merman's legs, right below his knees. The beast had attacked his girlfriend, he couldn't expect to get out of this with an intact corpse. It was clear that this merman was a caster, albeit blessed with a strong body thanks to his race. Still, facing them like this was just stupid. He should have come out and hidden behind those tanky fishmen to fight together with them. "You cut off my leg! You barbarian! How could you?" "UHNG, suddenly James' head snapped back. The merman had faked his panic and headshot James with his water jet. "Haha! You fell for it," the merman laughed. However, his laugh suddenly got stuck in his throat when a sword was lodged in his stomach. "What happened? The cat caught your tongue?" James growled with a smirk. A thin trail of blood was running down his face, but he was fine otherwise. The sudden magic attack had been mostly blocked by his helmet's shield enchantment. With a brutal shield bash, the warrior smashed the merman's weirdly alluring faces into a bloody mess. The humanoid lost consciousness but was not dead. "Enemy successfully captured," James reported to Jess, who walked up. "Well done," she praised and proceeded to kick the disabled merman in the balls. Several times. The merman woke up and lost consciousness again several times. Laura attempted to stop her, but James held her back. "Don't interfere. If she can't let off the steam, she will be insufferable for the rest of the day." Leaving Jess and the merman, James and Laura entered the office where they found out why the merman had not joined earlier. He managed to lock the system. Chapter 370. And the silver spoon. Which means, give a few minutes. While Laura was occupied with the computer, James came out to find Jess had already tied up the merman. "I got in." "Sort off," Laura suddenly exclaimed. "Can you stop the monster from getting outside now?" "No. I was unable to get access to the restricted functions. The facility will automatically proceed to eject subjects for defense until there are no more inside. However, I have access to documents and security reports," she said stressed. "What about Drosy and his people? Do you have access to that information?" "Yes, that and more. They transferred Drosy and the others to the Cradle, a facility in the northwest of Beta District. I will print it out." With this, they had a list of transferred individuals, a map, their destination, and the route they took. As Jess and James were still checking the information, they heard Laura behind them inhale in shock. "What's up?" "I found the last security report before the evacuation order. If these conjectures are true, you will have to hurry or you might be too late." What Laura had found was the report on what happened in research and holding in the lower flowers. Specimens labeled FHXXX had suddenly shown signs of sentience. In a moment of negligence, one of the creatures managed to overwhelm the guards and free others of its kind. "I see, but what does that have to do with us having to hurry?" FH stands for fish hybrids. They are a mix of humans and the enemy soldiers caught during. The report suspects that there might be a kind of mental connection between members of the Empire, like a hive mind controlled by their nobles. It was this group of escaped creatures that slaughtered their way to the main entrances and opened them for the Empire. That means, if the Empire gets close to the Cradle, the same might happen, and the chances of saving the Tija will decrease. We have to get to Sir Jonah and tell him. Is there a proper employee entrance or something like that? Yes, we should be able to reach it from the administration. Laura showed them the route on the computer when they suddenly heard beastly cries fill the hallways of the facility. What was it now? "Kakik, I will have your heads," the merman on the ground laughed through his missing teeth. Oh, mental connection. James stabbed the merman in the face with his sword. Why did you do that? He summoned his army here. We won't have the time to interrogate him, and taking him with us is like carrying a GPS tracker. Let's just get out as quickly and stealthily as we can. Fine. Jonah was slowly getting tired of this. It wasn't just the strength and number of the creatures that got to him. These humanoids did not look to have any precious materials, and they gave almost no experience. Their strength was in the range of a level 75 humanoid monsters or mini-boss in a dungeon, but the experience they gave was that of a level 50 mob at most. Jonah had killed dozens and couldn't see even the slightest change to his experience bar. He was technically working for nothing here. At least they were good targets for filling up his life force reservoir. With the hungry coin and the vampiric rings, he had the survivability of a cockroach and the toughness of a leather sole. Suddenly there was an explosion from a nearby building, and a pair of Oath Guard with a civilian came running out of the smoke cloud. Lord Jonah! We need some help. We know where the kitties are, the female mage called out to him. It became quickly evident why they needed his help. A crowd of giant fish beasts was hot on their heels. He didn't hesitate and charge off against the swarm of fish. Jonah was originally from Y City, and his eyes were filled with rage when he saw these old enemies. The guarding humanoids only followed him so far, before returning to their duty. Oh yeah, this was a completely different fight for Jonah. The fish were around level 70 and gave him a few % experience each. Age did not hold back, thanks to the resource pool he had accumulated from his previous fight. Together with the help of Jess and James, he quickly turned the fishmen into sashimi. You said you know where the kitty the Tijat are? Jonah asked when they finally found a quiet place to rest. Yes, sir. We snuck into the Zen biologies while you were fighting and found this woman. She supposedly helped send the letter, and she helped us find the current location of Drosy. Laura shrunk back upon seeing the demon mask up close when Jonah looked at her. The duo hurriedly showed him the transfer report and the map. We have to send a message to Minas Mar promptly. Maybe they can send reinforcement there. With some luck, Seth has returned already. Seth. The Tower Master, at least try to remember important names. Jess scolded James. Tower Master. Laura mumbled confusedly. Okay, I decided. You two will use home call and report back home. I will protect her and will travel to the cradle from here. Yes, sir. Jess and James agreed, but Laura suddenly grabbed Jess's hand. Please don't leave me alone with him, she asked, scared of Jonah and his mask. Don't worry. Lord Jonah is a very polite person. He will take good care of you. With a reassuring smile, the two suddenly vanished as they used home call. When Seth had just gotten some sleep, things fell into a rush. Mary woke him in a hurry when a bunch of members of the Oath Guard returned with news on the mission in Beta. The lords of Minas Mar had already assembled when Seth entered the conference room, where they briefed him of the details. Are there any news of my uncle and the others? Duhu suddenly charged into the room. I see, you have been informed, but why did you have to break the door? Seth mentioned, looking at what was left of the door, stuck to Duhu's claws. I'm sorry. They also explained the situation in Beta to Duhu. The Tigerman had a bad feeling when he listened to how dire the situation in Beta was. Foreign invaders rampaging through the land, hordes of refugees traveling north, and monsters following them in droves. Some of the members of the expedition had returned with heavy injuries, with a few still missing. Jonah being one of them. You, under these circumstances, I would understand if you decided not to send another team. Could you give me a mount and some rations for the journey, if it isn't too much to ask? Duhu felt that he had gotten quite close with Seth, which was the reason he could not expect him to pay such a huge price for his personal matter. What are you even saying? Drosy and his people are friends of Minas Mar. It's clear as day that I'm going with you. I object. Mary and Jane suddenly said in sync, looking at each other in surprise. Seth blinked at them in surprise. Why? You have just returned after several weeks. It would take several weeks for you to return. You can't just leave again for such a wild goose chase. We also like Drosy and the other, but Minas Mar needs your presence right now. What are you talking about? Why would it take several weeks? We have Al now. By the way, where is Alzalsar? He finally mentioned the absence of the sorceress. Alzalsar? Isn't she in your inventory? Are you saying you will summon her to travel to Beta? But she is only present for an hour. How will that reduce the time in the long run? Stop. Stop. Are you telling me none of you met her in the last few hours? Confused silence followed. Why would they have emptied her? What was the Tower Master talking about? Seth rubbed his temples and sighed. I finished her vessel before I went to sleep. She has a body now. He explained when a sudden inspiration. Quick! Send someone to the red light district. If we hurry, we might still be able to save some of them. Hee, too late. I am already back. A scantily dressed figure materialized from smoke and swaggered into the room. Alzalsar, the room exclaimed in surprise. Seth's face darkened. Did that mean they did not believe him? But his heart also calmed. He knew his worry was without basis. For a moment he thought the sorceress had just run off. See, I told you. With her here, the journey won't take long. Is that true? Yes, I have a way to quicken the journey easily, Al said with a confident smile. Actually, I already procured the necessary means to do so. Well, if it's Alzalsar it should be reliable, Mary mumbled. Hey, are you saying I am unreliable? Seth complained. With the sorceress present, there was no more opposition for the search and rescue mission, and the planning was finished quickly. Chapter 371. Al's shuttle. You gotta be kidding me, Al? Are you serious? Seth asked, exasperated when he saw what the ex-lich had prepared for their glorious journey. In front of the entrance of Minas Mar, the imposing magic tower inside a giant cavern, stood a grey omnibus with old blue color flaking off. Supposedly she had bought that thing for a gold coin on a junkyard. We are going to fly to Beta in this thing. It awoke uncomfortable memories of a game Seth knew. Where did the sorceress even find a junkyard in Delta? Why did they have to fly in a scrapped bus? Yes. What is the problem? It is sturdy, it has a lot of space. I just have to some enchantments on this bad boy, and we are ready to go, she said enthusiastically. Why was she so obsessed with this thing? Seth was not the only one with a dark face. When they heard that the sorceress could create them a vehicle to fly to Beta, they all had pictures of grand and fantastic fantasy aircrafts in mind. Not a flying bus that would better fit into a museum. I think this is a great idea. Thank you, great sorceress. Duha was the only one stoked about this peculiar vehicle. Fine. Then we will leave once all preparations are done. Seth said unwillingly. He couldn't postpone this just because he doubted Alzalsar's aesthetics. Not with the excited Tigerman here. It was decided that they would take 10 talented people of the Oath Guard with them, while the lords would stay at Minas March. Additionally, Team 3 would accompany them. The new team was not yet formed, so there were only Azul, Archer, and Lydia. This trip was also a chance for the Cybergoth to recruit members for her team from the members of the Oath Guard. Seth was glad to see that she had already gotten much livelier, facing her new responsibilities after being healed. While everyone else was preparing, Seth watched the sorceress enchant the bus with interest. The enchanting process of an enchanter was much different than his own, and it also came with optical changes, which pleased the blacksmith a lot. The old omnibus changed color to a midnight blue and even its body shell became rounder and more aerodynamic. In the end, it looked more like a weird science fiction version of an omnibus than the awkward asset of a game. Although it was not necessarily his taste, this was a lot better than before. As he was watching, Mary approached him from behind. Seth, another 2 members of the Oath Guard have just returned from Beta. They are in quite a hurry and said that they have important information. You should come, too. Tower Master. James exclaimed in surprise when he saw Seth enter the room. Monique had told them to wait for another person to join them, but they had not expected Seth to come. They had not known that the Tower Master had finally returned to Minas Mar while they were on a mission. You are not the first people to return from Beta. There must be a reason why I had to come personally. Seth asked friendly. He remembered the faces of these 2. Although they did not win the tournament, he had a good impression of them. He was glad that they had made it into the Oath Guard. Lord Jonas sent us back. We managed to gather important information about the whereabouts of the kiddies. Jess reported seriously. The kiddies. I mean Drosy and his kin, she said and blushed. She had been in a hurry and blurted out her nickname for the Tidjat. Just don't let them hear it. Seth cautioned her, amused. Then the 2 reported what had happened in Beta after their group was split. Despite the embarrassment, they told him everything from how they were able to avoid fights thanks to their experience as burglars and even their less than glorious escape from the burrow using the crawl space and vents of the facility. The blacksmith was surprised by their ambition. Instead of saving their lives and coming back, they had stayed out of their own volition to gain contributions. These two had potential. Maybe they deserved a chance. And Jonah is still back in Beta, protecting that woman? Seth asked while he was reading the documents of the cradle. Yes, Sir Jonah said he would meet reinforcements at the cradle. You two must be tired. You have done a lot. It's a shame you won't be able to accompany us. You know, we just decided to make a third field team and the next mission is also a trial for the team leader to choose members. James didn't quite follow, but Jess's ear perked up. A chance to enter the field teams. That was above even a team leader in the Oath Guard. On top of that, they could buy epic equipment made by the Tower Master. This was different from the Oath armor that wastes some of its power on the Oath function. It was slightly stronger and, most importantly, they would be able to keep it, even if they were to leave Minas Mar at some point. One had to know that the turquoise anvil only sold very few epic items while most were hoarded inside the tower, for the use by members. Tired? We aren't tired. Right, James? What are you saying? I am really off. He was interrupted by his girlfriend's elbow in his ribs. Not tired at all. Jess insisted. I see, then do you want to join us? Yes, the mage said spiritedly. Why yes. James followed, still confused and wary. Great, but first you should put new equipment. I won't be able to fix that stuff before our departure, so go and get a new set each. Yes, sir, both said in sync. The promise of new equipment even raised James's weary spirits. With that, they were led out of the room, by one of Mary's subordinates. Are you sure? They looked really tired. It is their choice. They can just sleep on the journey. And about the field team. If they can hit it off with Lydia, I see no reason why they shouldn't join. Even if their levels are a bit lacking, that's nothing some grinding can't fix. The chemistry within the party is more important than individual levels. Who said that? Me. Hey, aren't you belittling me a bit too much? I was just joking, she said with a sweet smile. Seth sighed. You have changed quite a lot since that time in the forest. What happened to that cute and timid priestess from back then? Someone dumped a huge load of work and responsibilities on her. Hey, if I remember correctly, you were the one who proudly spoke of your economics education. Still. I'm sorry. I promise I will try a little harder in the future. Says the guy running off, just a few days after he returned. Ouch. They kept bantering until someone came to inform them that the preparations were ready. The sorceress had finished her enchantments, the rations were distributed and the Oath Guard was ready to board the bus. They were just waiting for Seth. Chapter 372. The Cradle. What do you mean, you are not coming along? Seth asked in surprise. I mean, that I am not coming along. I will stay here and work on those books the old man gave you. You mean Master Mountain? Yes. But we need you. Seth pleaded desperately. What about his easy bus? Al had finally evolved into a permanent summon only to tell him that she would not follow him anymore. Seth had looked forward to watching the sorceress slaughter mobs and reaping the experience from behind. But he couldn't force her. In his heart of hearts, he knew that he could not force her to be his shuttle. She had already fulfilled her duty by building him one. It was not the same kind of shuttle, but he had to live with it. Once again, he would have to rely on Puffles for the hard work. Don't degrade the great me like this. I'm joking, I'm joking. Maybe I should stay, too. Then Mom would have some opportunity to spend time with his child. The Ivisor teased. Seth felt hurt. Not only did Puffles not want to be his bus, he even wanted him to be the bus for someone else. However, he wasn't wrong. During the journey, Seth lacked the peace of mind to really care for the little Imuji. The blacksmith also wasn't really the type to go on journeys without a good reason. Maybe this was a chance for him and his new pet to bond and have it gain some strength. Fine, I won't rely too much on you, Puffle. But you have to come along, in case stuff goes wrong. This isn't a day trip after all. This is serious business. I shall only come out when I deem it necessary. I'm still digesting after all. Seth waited for a moment when he realized that there would be no snarky comment from Al. She wasn't in his headspace anymore. Lazy worm, Al said out loud. Seth looked at her surprised. PFF, I can still hijack your telepathy. Better than before even. Don't worry so much and just leave. The bus is fully fueled and there should be no problems getting there and back. Okay then, we are off. The sorceress had explained the controls to Dohu and a few members of the Oath Guard that would come along on this trip. When they turned the key, the bus started hovering gently above the ground. The passengers watched the cavern and the main entrance of Minas Mar pass by as the vehicles gently levitated outside. Once the surrounding was clear of obstacle, the speed picked up quickly. Compared to their height and the speed of the landscape changing below, Seth was surprised by how comfortable their flight was. It was no different from driving in a normal bus. The only difference was that they were watching the mountain range flow past below them, instead of a road. Like he had predicted, Jess and James had soon fallen asleep. Seeing the performance, Seth was sure these things would sell like hotcakes if their energy consumption wasn't this abysmal. That's right, the bus was using the monocrystals Minas Mar fabricated and sold to the government. And not a little number. This made it unprofitable for anybody except Minas Mar, who could produce them in bulk. Even then, they had to justify the production to the Krana Empire, so they wouldn't be able to use the bus for fun rides. Dohu, are you okay? The Tigerman had been staring out of the window with a forlorn gaze. Oh, yeah. I'm okay. Don't worry too much. I'm sure they are okay. Seth tried to comfort the mountain of muscle and fur. You are probably right. Let's hope you are. Dohu answered and rubbed something in his hand. Only now did Seth notice the letter in the big man's hand. It was Lonnie's letter. Had he kept reading it the whole time? He patted his shoulder but said no more. What are those? Are those eagles? The eagles, someone quoted, but it was a bad joke. Mountain Eagle leave 64. Mountain Eagle leave 62. Just outside the vicinity of Delta, they faced a pair of giant eagles that suddenly attacked their flying bus. They had not been traveling through the skies for long before the first flying monsters appeared. It was to be expected as they had chosen the direct route to Beta instead of secure trails explored by the few travelers and messengers that traveled between the districts. The mountains were filled with strong and highly territorial monsters, many of them flying. This made them very annoying for one simple reason: the moment they realized they could not win the fight, they would use their aerial advantage to flee. Without the Krana Empire's protection, Delta District would have long been overrun by demons or monsters like these. As mentioned, the moment the eagles were struck by several of Archer's arrows, they let off and fled from the fight. Had they tried to chase the eagles, they would have probably been unable to catch up. It did not matter, though. They had a more important mission, so nobody had any interest in hunting them. Except for one. A pair of big, dark eyes kept following the eagles in the distance. But they looked delicious. Why can't we hunt them? We don't have the time. If you want delicious things, I can give you some of the food Link has prepared. You like his meals, right? Can I? Yay! Although the little emoji happily inhaled the food Seth gave him, through their connection he could feel its reluctance of letting the eagles go. For him to feel it, it had to be more than some suddenly fancy or curiosity. Was it because the emoji was technically a snake? Some inborn enmity with eagles, maybe? Seth also vaguely remembered that there were other legendary creatures like a roc or a phoenix who were known as the hereditary enemies of snakes. Seth let his thoughts drift while looking at the changing landscape below. He remembered that there were certain conditions that had to be met for an emoji to turn into a dragon. At first, the blacksmith had thought that it may only need a lot of levels to turn it into a dragon. He remembered some novels, where monsters would evolve after reaching a certain level. But what if the emoji was like Puffles and needed to meet specific conditions to evolve? The Evisor needed to consume special ores or energies to grow. Was the emoji the same? Maybe its compulsive appetite for some things was a hint to that? At least it seemed more likely than needed a dragon's blessing or essence to evolve like in the legends he knew. As they continued their flight, they kept chasing off monsters in a similar manner. There were many kinds of giant birds but also weird stuff like ice bats. Seth would have loved to see something cool and classy, like a real griffin or a pegasus. Then he could have asked Ethan if they could try and tame one of those. But he was thoroughly disappointed. Except for the birds who were split into beasts that evolved from the mana and some that had come here through the pathworks, there were only ugly things like the ice bats and demonic beasts. They also spotted some undead. The mountains were not peaceful. They avoided many fights because a lot of the creatures here were already locked in combat with each other. The mountain range outside the districts was in a constant war for survival. Just having some semi-safe trails between the districts was already a blessing, if one saw what was going on here. Seth suddenly felt very lucky, that the worst they had faced were the ice trolls. Beta is finished. Seth heard someone mumble in the back. It was Jess and James whispering with each other as they stared out the window. They had woken up at some point and were constantly staring outside. What do you mean? The blacksmith asked. Oh. Arim, James who had mumbled it tried to formulate his thoughts. What he means is, that currently Beta is being invaded from the sea and the leadership has already been overrun. Now all the people are brainlessly running in the opposite direction of the enemy army. In which are the mountains? Everyone knew about the secure trails but only a few actually knew those paths. This meant all the civilians running for their lives would fall back to common knowledge. They would use either highways or try their luck with the maglev rails. The problem was that none of those were safe. All streets and rails in the open field would crawl with monsters, while the extensive subterranean tunnels that connected the districts were confirmed to have turned into giant dungeons. Those people were stuck between a rock and a hard place. Chapter 373. The Cradle, 2. Simon, didn't the System Church have a branch in Beta? Seth asked after pulling out a small orb from his inventory and calling someone. This was a communication crystal. The group of Minasmar has purchased several for this mission after it became known that phones would not work in Beta. Yes, what about it? The old priests answered the question after receiving the video call. Do you have any information about the fact that Beta is being overrun? Let me take a look. Wait a moment. The rotund man stood up and left the desk his orb was placed on. He soon returned with a scroll in his hand. Here it is. Yes. The Beta branch was evacuated 7 days ago because of the Muir Empire's claim on the territory. You already knew about the state of Beta for 7 days. Not really, I was occupied with your matter, you know. But why did you suddenly call me? Seth explained what they were currently doing and the state of Beta. Somehow, he hoped Simon would know an easy way out. The church was an expert in teleporting people around. He was sure they could have evacuated them or something. Even with the randomized effect for Orihumas, people would have had a better chance than trying to cross the mountains. Seth, did you forget our principles? Non-interference. Struggle. We are not a charity organization that is scrambling to collect followers for our God like other churches. We won't actively help, and we do not interfere in a war within the system. A war within the system. Yes, the Muir Empire is part of the system, just like the Krina Empire. They even have their own iteration of the System Church. But didn't you help with the people of Gamma? Seth asked confusedly. After all, they had founded a starter village there, brought provisions, and were intent on bringing all of them back to Delta. How was that non-interference? Those are the actions of the Krina Empire, not the System Church, although we help as members of the Empire. Seth fell silent. He did not ask why the Empire did not help in Beta. After talking with Simon, he could roughly guess the politics behind this. They had come across the refugees of Gamma on their pursuit of the Zarkists. Helping them was almost like collecting free gratitude and roping in a lot of Orihumas. All it cost them, were some negotiations with Arjit Noor, who had no real interest in them. Beta on the other hand was actively invaded by the Muir Empire. They were very much interested in making the people of Beta their subjects. It meant that interfering there could lead to a war. Expecting the Krina Empire to readily intervene like in Gamma was naive. Seth's head was heating up from thinking of such complicated matters. He was already thoroughly overburdened dealing with a few hundred people, which was why he had tried hard to shove any responsibility for the caravan onto others. Now he was facing the problems of a whole district. Seth. I can see the cogs in your head spinning. Simon suddenly said. The blacksmith had just fallen silent without ending the call. I think I know what you are thinking about. Can I give you some advice? Sure. Choose your battles. You cannot save the whole world alone. Solve the problems right in front of you instead of worrying about the world. Concentrate on what is the most important to you. Don't you have a mission? Don't you have people that need you? Don't burden yourself with the worries of the world and focus on changing what you can. Change what I can change. Seth thought about it. He looked to Doho who was still staring at the letter in his hand. Yes, there were things he needed to do right in front of him, but choose his battles. Cannot save the world alone. Change what he can change. He had an idea. You are right. I will concentrate on what I can change. After he ended his call with Simon, he made another. On the morning of the second day of their journey, the number of monsters drastically lowered when they left the central mountain range and got closer to the territory of Beta. Maybe we should land and take a thorough rest before entering the cityscape. Doha proposed. They had gotten some sleep. They had guarded in shifts and the drivers had taken turns to fly through the night. However, sleeping in a flying bus that was constantly attacked by beasts was not known for comfortable rest. Still, I appreciate your consideration, but don't force yourself. We all got some rest and no time to lose to save Drosy and the others. Right. Seth asked in the bus and a choir of approval came back. See? They are all energetic. Let's get your people home first and then take a long break. Thank you, everyone. Doha finally answered, facing the window. Ah, are you embarrassed? Lydia teased the tigerman. It's hard to tell, since we can't see when he blushes. Seth played along with a grin. It was good to joke a little to lift the mood. We are here, the driver suddenly said. Before them rose the tall high-risers and skyscrapers of Beta's cityscape. The blocky, tall building and their deep, tight canyons, like fractal patterns, reminded of a gigantic and unique geological formation and not of structures built by mankind. This was a completely new perspective. Especially for Seth and the others who were used to living in these cityscapes. Seeing it in the morning sun, from up high, looking like something almost natural, filled them with awe. At the edge of the city, they landed and got off the bus. From here, they continued their journey on mounts. Why? A flying bus would pull a lot of attention. Even in a normal situation, they would need to expect people trying to attack and steal it from them. Currently Beta was in a crisis with refugees trying to get away all over the place. They could really go without a whole crow of desperate people wishing to take away their escape vehicle. Only a short bit of the way remained. The cradle was situated at one of the satellite cities at the outer rim in the north of District Beta. This was not far from the place they landed. It would merely take an hour or two to reach there with the mounts. Since not everyone could fit on Puffles and Seth did not want to reveal one of their trump cards, the blacksmith would ride together with Doho on his mount. The tigerman called an imposing giant polar bear his mount. It was about 3 times the size of a regular polar bear and had a set of light blue lightning patterns across its body. But when Seth tried to stow away the bus in his inventory, it didn't work. What was the problem? Fortunately, when he tried again, the bus was obediently tucked away in his inventory. It was a little puzzling, but nobody bothered with it any further. Sitting on the bear behind Dohu, Seth had a good view of their surrounding as they rode through the suburbs made up of mostly apartment buildings. It seemed like the impact of the war in the south had not yet reached this place. The streets seemed calm and there were no people outside this early in the morning. Seeing the city this empty had something tranquil, but also something eerie. According to the information brought back by Jess and James, the cradle was situated in the industrial area. After reaching the city, they just had to cross a small part of the suburbs to reach there. The cradle was a completely unassuming office building, which was why they took a while to find it. The names and biologies was only a small line of text on a sign at the automatic gates of the property. Should we enter, or wait for Jonah? Ah, I will give a signal. James belatedly exclaimed. A signal? Seth asked. Yes, Mr. Felton came up with it. It is a standard way for members of the Oath Guard to ask for help and assemble at a location. With that, James lifted a small tube over his head and fired the magic equivalent of a signal flare into the sky. It was a tall, purple pillar of smoke with a bright light at the tip. The signal persisted for several minutes before dissipating. And now? We wait. If Sir Jonah is anywhere close by, he should arrive in a few there he is. James joined down the street, where a dark figure with a hunchback was running in their direction. As it got closer, they recognized Jonah with his demonic mask and a person on his back. Seth, the vampiric swordsman, exclaimed in joy when he reached their group. The blushing lady came off his back but did not stop hugging his arm. Jonah! I am gone for a little and you got yourself a girlfriend, he greeted the friend jokingly. What he did expect was that the man behind the mask suddenly fell silent and awkwardly scratched the back of his head. It can't be. Stuff happened. Jonah said vaguely after slightly lifting his mask. Hello. I'm Laura, a former researcher at Zen Biologies. You must be the tower master Jonah told me about. Please take care of me. She spoke to Seth as if he was her father-in-law. Ah, yes, hi. Seth said in confusion. Both of these people were older than him, why did they act like flirty teenagers? Anyway, let's get going. Chapter 374. Everybody's gone? Despite the very obvious signal, there was no reaction. Even when they jumped over the gate and neared the building, there was no one to be seen. They broke the entrance glass doors of the unassuming office building. An automatic alarm sounded, but the entrance was deserted, and nobody came to see what was wrong. What is going on in this place? Archer mumbled. I have a bad feeling about this, Lydia muttered. The silent city was one thing, but there was nobody in the facility, either. Jonah, what about you guys? Did you see anybody on the way here? The swordsman stayed silent for a moment before he answered. He, with Laura on his back, had been non-stop running to reach this satellite city. There had been a lot of monsters in B-City itself. Past that the cityscape was already mostly deserted, but there were still refugees to be seen here and there. Now that he thought about it, they had not seen anyone ever since entering this city. Neither monsters nor people. Jonah had thought it was because of the early time of the day. Seth took a deep breath and thought about it. Let me call Simon. Maybe he knows something. I don't think everyone here already evacuated. I could check the computer and see if I find anything useful. Yes, thank you. Seth agreed distractedly. Sitting in front of the computer at the reception desk, she found a layer of dust covering everything. Laura was not originally a staff of the Cradle, but she knew some of the tricks to get into the system, although not the deeper parts. With the help of the original receptionist's sticky notes, she quickly gained access to the local profile. Meanwhile, Seth had described the current situation they were facing to Simon through the magic communication device. You are saying the whole population of a city vanished? There are quite a few explanations for that, but with the current state of this world, I won't be able to give you a reliable answer. I could list down many possible causes, but it might end up being none of them. Just give me a summary of the most common ones, please. If there are no fresh signs of fighting, then they could have been abducted by something or someone using mind magic. They could have also been shifted by a space phenomenon or lured and assembled in a specific space. The possible suspects would be ghosts, demons, a dungeon, or plain old coincidence. You see what I mean with unreliable answers, right? Yeah, I understand, thanks for your help. I couldn't really help, but I will try to contact the people originally stationed in Beta, maybe they have information to narrow it down. Please do that. Thanks again. With that, their call ended. Did you find anything, Laura? Seth turned to the other possible source of information. I got access to the local account. There is not much info on the Cradle, but I was able to check the emails. These people got an evacuation notice roughly 1 week ago, about the time B-City was overrun. All staff and subjects were to be transported to a secure facility. So, where did they bring them? Seth asked, frustrated. They had come this far only for the princess to be at another castle. That's the problem. The email was still unread. All emails of the past 10 days are unread. I don't think there was anybody left to take these orders. Does that mean my uncle and the others vanished, too? Not necessarily. Lydia mentioned. Didn't you listen to Simon? There is a high chance something or someone used magic to abduct people. But if your people and the other subject were locked up, they would not be able to follow some weird mental call, right? Okay, we should split up and search the place and see if we can find the entrance to the actual facility. We meet here again in 30 minutes. Found it. It took less than 5 minutes for Lydia to shout. She, Azul, and Archer were standing before a wide entrance to an elevator. In a room secured by a keypad and iris scanner were 2 big bookshelves pulled to the sides, indicating that this entrance was usually well guarded and hidden. Is this how you people usually hide secret passages? Azul asked, interested. I have never seen anything quite like that, but more or less, yes. I always thought this kind of stuff was fiction, to be honest, Archer commented. They were quickly joined by the rest of the team who had heard Lydia shout. This should be it, right? She asked Seth when he came running, with Tuhad on his tails. It definitely looks very suspicious. Let's wait at the meeting place for the others and have Laura have a look. He had just finished speaking when the rest of the team arrived. Everyone had heard Lydia and came running. Yes, this should be it. Laura identified the elevator before pulling out a security card. I got this from the front desk. With this, we should be able to use it to enter the cradle facility. They did not immediately enter the subterranean complex. Before they descended, they split into two groups. Laura, Seth, Dohu, Jess, James, Team 3, and a healer from the Oath Guard would enter the cradle. Jonah would stay guard with the rest outside. Seth left their bus to the swordsman outside. They would not only secure a quick escape but were also a failsafe to call reinforcements in case something happened Seth and the others could not deal with. If worse came to worst, they could return to Delta and get reinforcements. But with the rescue party's heavy hitters entering the complex, this was really the more dangerous duty, as they still did not know what was going on in this place. However, Seth trusted Jonah to be able to deal with things. Especially with his high willpower and defense against mind techniques. After all preparations were finished, they warily entered the elevator and descended into the cradle. Jess and James immediately recognized the layout. It was almost exactly the same as the administration in the burrow. It was just that the entrance above was much better hidden. If we find the system administrator's office, I might be able to find out where they held the Tijal, Laura said after seeing where they entered. The researcher wanted to prove her worth to the boss of her hubby. After Jonah ended up exposing his face to her during their eventful journey, things happened, and she wanted to earn her place at his side and in Mina's march. Of course, Seth had no idea yet, but he was glad to see her help them so actively despite working against her former employer. I think this will be easier than we thought. Jess called out. It quickly became obvious why she said that. The computer in the room was on standby, but all of them were still logged in with various programs and some porn videos still open. As if the user had just stood up and left in the middle of business. Laura had an easy time, she just had to avoid the sticky workplaces and choose the computer with administrative rights. While she was checking the system, the others explored the area. Just in case they had missed something or someone. As she was searching for information, Seth noticed that Laura's face became bright red. Are you okay? Yes. It's just... What? Everyone exclaimed after the researcher explained what she had found. The cradle was a facility for the purpose of natural reproduction of promising test subjects. In other words, breeding. Does that mean those videos might very well be either live feeds or recording of what was going on in this place? Yes. Then my uncle and the others. Dohu stuttered. I don't know. I found the info that they were brought in and where they should stay. But there is nothing else. I tried getting access to the cameras but that's behind a password and I'm not really a hacker. So we don't know if anyone is still there. Seth made sure. No. Well, then we should go take a look. Chapter 375. Fruitful Growth. The section was called Holding, similar to Research and Holding in the burrow. After what they heard from Jess and James, the rescue party had expected the worst. Hearing from Laura what this facility was supposed to be for, they imagined dark and moist sex dungeons. But when they arrived, it had more of a subterranean luxury apartment complex. Although still cells they could not leave whenever they wanted, what the group could see through the door windows looked like suites of a high-class hotel. Was this what they meant with natural reproduction? They simply treated them well, and gave them all the necessary incentives to do the deed? Except for the high quality of life in this place, it was as they had hoped. Whatever made the people disappear, did not magically phase them out of existence. The cells were still inhabited by the former test subjects. With a security ID that was thoughtlessly left on the guard desk at the entrance, they managed to open the cells without any problems. They found many beastmen like Mina and Mike but of other races, like rabbits, dogs, cows. There were also others like the Tijake, races more on the animalistic side. There was even an apartment with two bearded dwarves, one of them visibly expecting a child. They came across a large variety of races and this was the case for many of them. It seemed that the natural reproduction had some help from additives in the food and water given to them. What they all had in common was that they were dehydrated and starving. Some, those that had no rations left in the inventory, were so weakened that they could barely move. After 10 days without supplies from outside, it was a wonder they were still alive. Especially those who were in circumstances. Seth and Dohu already started worrying when they finally found the Tijat. They were also locked away in pairs, in the last cells they checked. Their joy of finding them was slightly dampened when they found that the old like Drosy and children like Lonnie were missing. Their heart sank when could not find them among the captives. But one of the weakened guards suddenly spoke to them. Dohu! It's you, right? You have to look for Drosy and the children. They were delivered here with us. They had sedated us, but I still remember that we arrived together and were split afterward. They should be here. You have to find them. What are you talking about? They have the old and young just a few floors below. A relatively fit elf who overheard the conversation commented. Are you sure? I have been here for several months. He blushed a little when he remembered what it meant. And I saw them bring the elderly and children down there. He finished his thought. While the other tended to the people, Seth and Doha went further down. They found delivery rooms and nurseries. Fortunately, they were empty. Finally, they found several rooms with young and elderly people acting like a daycare. This seemed almost humane. Brother Seth? Uncle Dohu, a little girl called out when they opened their third door. Among the children voices calling out, was also Drosy, the only elderly among the Tijak caravan. They had finally found them. Uncle! Dohu charged at him, pulling him into a tight bear hug. Dohu! Seth? How are you two together? No, what are you doing here? We came to save you, of course. Although, it did not really seem like they needed help. Compared to the others they found, the cat people had fared quite well. Oh, I still had a lot of rations in my inventory. They were not interested in those. Drosy said happily. They checked all the rooms for more captives, but only found a few. Not many groups traveled with children and the elderly across the pathworks. Upstairs they caused a few tearful reunions before the whole group got on their way out of the cradle. Suddenly a weird, high-pitched noise filled their ears upon arriving in the administration. It thoroughly rattled Seth's brain, but the more terrifying part was that the people around him started acting weird. Their eyes opened wide, with expressionless faces they started staggering towards the elevator up. Even Doho and the members of Team 3 were moving like expressionless zombies. This had to be the phenomenon that emptied the city. What should he do? He already had a hard time resisting himself. He could have used Dragon Might, but with how weakened many of them were, he could have hurt them. The space was too small to summon Puffles and the Emuji didn't want to come out. Royal Domain, he heard a squeaky voice call out and a golden membrane shielded everyone. With the golden barrier up, the pressure was lifted and Seth could think clearly again. The people around him seemed confused and couldn't remember what happened. Who? Finally! Finn's chance has come, a joyful fly was dancing in front of his face. No, it was no fly, it was the dreadful fairy brute. Finn, what are you doing here? How did you get here? Finn followed Seth. You said we would spend time together, but you just ran off. Finn decided to come along. But how? Wait, were you on the bus? That's why I couldn't store it the first time. Tehi. Don't tehi me. This is serious, seriously thank you. He was upset that she had simply followed, but in the end, he was just glad she did. This skill. It's part of the skills Finn got with her second class. It is a strengthened area heal, shield, and cure. That's right. Finn was originally a healer class, sort of. Seth had totally forgotten about that since she normally acted like a hardcore vanguard. Looking at the wide shield that enveloped everyone present, Seth remembered a crucial detail. What about the guys outside? He exclaimed. Although he had confidence in Jonah's mental resistance, after having a hard time himself he was not so sure anymore. Jonah had the bus. If the guys on the surface ran off, they would be stranded in this city. I will go up and look for them. Can I leave this place to you, Finn? Count on Finn. Seth left the confused crowd and hurriedly entered the elevator to the surface. Finn is the boss, she said smugly. The others like Doho and Lydia looked at her awkwardly, while the rest of the people still tried to understand why the little fairy was suddenly in charge. Once Seth left the area of Finn's royal domain, the brain-shattering whistle affected him again. At this moment he really regretted not having made some item with high mental resistance for switching to. He had trusted in high willpower, which was boosted by several items, which betrayed him in the end. However, he was able of resisting the terrible headache and could keep a clear head using the golden fleece to cast cure on himself. Arriving on the surface found their meeting place inside the building deserted. Jonah and the members of the Oath Guard had already left. Outside he immediately summoned Puffles who had kept urging him to get out. The giant nightmare centipede immediately summoned a golden shield, not unlike the one Finn had used. Don't compare the great me to Finn. I like Finn and would not like for her to feel inferior. Sure. The blacksmith mumbled as he got on the eye-visor's back. Enveloped in Puffle's golden bubble, they set to the sky and looked for the runaway people. They couldn't have gone too far, yet. They flew circles for several minutes until they finally spotted the group of teetering and murmuring team members on the central highway, walking in the direction of the city center. The question was, should they beat them down and drag them back or follow them and bat up whatever made that noise? Of course, we beat up whatever is giving off the annoying screech. Puffles said, determined to make the sound stop forever. We should beat up all but one and bring them back to the group, the Emuji suddenly suggested callously. That's my little junior. What the heck have you been teaching him, Puffles? Although he acted indignantly, Seth followed the chubby snake's plan. After pulling everyone into Puffles' shield, they regained their sanity. They then explained the situation to them. The vampiric swordsman volunteered because he had the tenacity of a cockroach. There was technically no way for him to die, even if something went wrong. After getting the bus from him, the others came aboard the centipede and they quickly flew back. Puffles could not enter the building, but the moment they left the shield, they lost their senses again. To save time, they simply tied them up and left them in the lobby of the cradle, before going back to following Jonah. On the way back, Seth called Lydia to tell them to take the tied-up oath guards. Chapter 376. Colossal Grounds. What is that? Seth exclaimed instinctively. In the center of the city was a giant crater filled with a wide dome that would cause a meltdown for anyone with trypophobia. It was covered in dozens of bigger and smaller undulating orifices. Ding! You have witnessed the terror of Field Boss Colossal Fungin, a living dungeon. Experience gained. I'm not getting close to that thing. Puffles states vehemently. Agreed. Let's grab Jonah and just get out of here. Who would want to go into something like that? A living dungeon? Judging by its outer appearance, the inside would be a horrible nightmare. Seth had no inclination to see that. He wasn't a masochist. They landed beside Jonah, whose mind immediately cleared after entering the eye-visor's bubble. What happened? What the F***ck is that? Doesn't matter, get on and let's get out of here. Jonah scrambled onto the centipede's back and they set off. Arim, are you seeing that too? Puffles asked warily. Upon the pet's notice, they both looked down, where the giant dome started tilting back and forth. Inadvertently Seth used observation on the dome. Colossal Fungin leave XX. Status, starving, enraged. Race, living dungeon fungulate. Was it angry because they snatched the one prey it had attracted? And what was a fungulate? His question was soon answered when the dome suddenly started rising. It balanced on a long neck which led to a giant deer-like body covered in weird growths. Overall, it was like a giant deer with a mushroom cap for a head. Its humongous hooves crushed the pavement and boardwalks and it slowly started following the flying centipede, as if it was a bait on a hook. We can't just return with this thing following us. We need to lose it first. Seth lamented. At least they were relatively safe up in the air. Was what he thought, but in the next moment the huge orifices started twitching and clouds of spores filled the air, shooting in their direction. The blacksmith reacted quickly and cast a fire shield on top of Puffles' bubble. Another layer was added with double cast. Fortunately, the spores burned away upon touching the fiery shield. There was no telling what kind of effect those would have had. Although they managed to deal with it easily, anybody else only relying on flying would probably have had a hard time after underestimating the mushroom dungeon deer. How are we supposed to lose this? Jonah asked, afraid. There was no way they would fight this, its level was so high, that even Jonah, who was close to level 70, could not see it with his observation. It was not just about level, it was also a gigantic creature, almost rivaling Chrysopras, the stone giant Seth met in the mountains, in height. The swamp dragon was just a worm compared to this thing. I have an idea. Jonah, you return first with home call. Report about this thing. Mary and Jane have to warn Y City. They will know why. Are you sure? Yes, I can go into stealth mode once I am alone. Slightly unwilling to leave his new girlfriend behind, Jonah finally returned to Delta with home call. Now that Seth was alone, he did not try to hide immediately. He called Lydia with the communication orb. Seth? What is going on out there? What's with these earthquakes? Don't worry about it. Get ready to use the bus and get out of here as quickly as possible. Will you be okay? Sure, don't worry about me and get going. I'm not sure that we can fit all of them in the bus. You will have to make it work, I am a little occupied on my end. No matter what. Do whatever is needed. I will join you later. Okay. Ending the call, Seth and Puffles kept kiting the monstrosity for some time longer, before Seth equipped the helm of Hades and called the eye-visor back to the pet space. After a short fall, he landed on the roof of an apartment building. Having lost its target, the giant fungulate stood still. Having lost his eye-visor, Seth was tortured by the beast's high-pitched whistle. Bearing the mean headache, the blacksmith started running back in the direction they came from. He had learned from Jess and James' story, though he put his own twist to their method. Equipped with his pickaxe and backed by his powerful stats, Seth broke his way cross-country through walls and buildings, taking the direct path back to the cradle and past the living dungeon deer. Reaching the cradle, he found a bunch of ripped-out bus seats strewn across the parking lot. So this was Lydia's idea to make room for all the people they rescued. Seth nodded approvingly before he got back into the run. Thanks to his high endurance stat, he had great stamina and was able to keep his speed for a long time. The direction was easily determined. The direct line back to Mina's march. The blacksmith kept running and mining until he finally left the range of the fungeon. There he felt safe enough to bring Puffles out again. Hehe, it is nice to see you running for once. Yeah, but now it's your turn. I won't be able to catch up with the others if we don't fly. Ask me nicely. Puffles. Fine. Please, oh Puffles the Great, please help me catch up with the others. Humph, it didn't seem too genuine, but okay. Finally, they set off and got on track to catch up with their flying bus. In the future people would need to avoid this area. Maybe this thing would just starve to death if no more food came by. But the thought of a living dungeon was intriguing. How was it a dungeon, if it actively hunted prey? Or maybe it did not necessarily need a huge amount of prey to survive. Dungeons were also the domain of a god. Was it something like a divine beast of the god of dungeons? Stop thinking about useless stuff, the bus is up ahead. The eye-visor said slightly grumpy. Calling that disgusting thing a divine beast was like comparing it to him, which displeased him greatly. What came up ahead had less of a flying bus and more of a levitating sardine can. The bus, without seats, was filled to the brim with the passengers being squashed against the windows. The members of the Oath Guard, except for the driver, were holding onto the roof of the car. On one hand, it was to make space and on the other hand, they were able to defend the bus better. Enveloping the bus were several shields, that guarded against beasts, but all helped protect the people on the roof against the elements. Lydia Seth called her on the communication orb since there was no way to talk normally like this. Seth? You are back. Wait, where's Jonah? I already sent him back to Mina's Mar to report. Tell the people to lower the shields for a moment, so I can enter. Finally, aboard the bus, Seth relaxed a little. The only complications on the way back were the various stops they had to make for people to eat, sleep, and get a breather. The airspace of the mountain range was already dangerous, but the surface completely crawled with strong beasts. Every stop came with a battle that most of the time ended with the beast running away. Beasts of the mountain range were not just strong, but also highly intelligent. They would flee the moment they realized they did not have a chance. Nobody dared to chase them, in fear of a trap. The journey back took another 3 days they spent fighting, resting, and flying. Seth used the downtimes to remotely organize some stuff for Beta. Change what he could change. Chapter 377. Somewhere else, 8. A party of shadows arrived at the edge of a vast rocky desert. A heavy shower drenched their black robes. The shade in the front pulled out a small orb and called someone. My lady. Do you have any news? A female voice came from the little orb. Yes, we just finished scouting the area. It is as the Earthling reported. We found residues of wards, probably from the theocracy. The corruption has spread after their stronghold fell and nobody was left to inject divine power. How much did it spread? It seems to have halted for now. This Earthling did quite a number on this place. The heavy rain of the recent day has washed away the ashes, leaving mostly barren rocks. Even the supernatural growth of this forest has a hard time encroaching on it. I don't know what kind of fire he used, but the corruption is staying away from this place. What measures do you think are appropriate? We have enough materials to set up temporary system barriers. If His Majesty deems it important enough, we could reconstruct the starter village in this place to keep the situation under control. Good. I will contact father. Stay put, you beast. Come and face Buddha's wrath. This monk will liberate you from the burden of existence. She was running for her life. What was going on? Aiming for Epsilon in the northeast of the continent, she had journeyed to find the mysterious figure that had beaten her up. Traveling for days and weeks, she found nothing. There were no signs of Epsilon district, heck there were not even ruins. Only vast lands lay before her. When she finally found signs of civilization, they were ruins. But not ruins from any civilization on Earth she knew of. She had explored a vast temple that must have been quite imposing and glorious in its heyday. The large structure was full of holes as if it had seen a great fight and was abandoned afterward. Although deserted and dilapidated, it gave her a dry place to sleep for a few days. She used it as a base to further explore these foreign lands. Then she finally met another human. He gave the impression of a well-meaning pilgrim. However, the moment she approached him, he suddenly started shouting gibberish. Buddha this, divine punishment that. It would not have been so bad if he didn't start attacking her. Now, she was quite confident in her power, which had recently grown to leave 70. She had diligently trained her skills and grew tough as a nail. Despite that, every hit of the older man hurt like hell. Once again, she felt like a frail girl thrown into a world of violence. She had worked so hard, why did it hurt so much? The armor she bought in Y City, which had served her well until now, broke after just 2 strikes which inflicted her with a weird status the system could not identify. You cannot hide the essence of your existence, demon. None of your magic can save you from facing this Buddhist's punishment today. Seeing her withstand his initial strikes, the monk became serious. Why are you doing this? With tears in her eyes, she did the only thing she could, run. There was no way she could fight that lunatic. In the meantime, the pursuer kept spouting self-righteous sounding gibberish she could not understand. I can read the fear in your eyes. Your demon magic cannot hold against my virtuous aura. The weirdo kept chasing her and tried to hit her with his fist. Every time he missed, he would smash boulders or create huge craters in the ground. With his bare fists. What kind of level would someone with a melee class need to reach, to casually deal that much damage? She had wanted to explore this place more since she had obviously entered a completely different world. She wanted to travel around and find out more about this place, but facing the current situation left her no other option. She was unwilling. She was unreconciled. She was unsatisfied. She used home call and milliseconds later, she appeared in Y City. Her equipment was in tatters, she was covered in sweat and dirt. And now a heavy rain washed over her, drenching her in the city's cold. At this point, she just wanted to curl up into a ball of sadness and wallow in self-pity right then and there. Who cared that she was in the middle of the street? What had become of her? She couldn't get her revenge on the champion of Zarkon. She couldn't find the mysterious figure that attacked her. She couldn't even explore a foreign world, without getting beaten up and running away. Listlessly listening to the sound of the heaving rain and the static dialogue of passers-by, her ears suddenly perked up. I don't believe it. I'm telling you. My cousin works at the association. The Allied rescue forces had a great battle and managed to wipe out the Zarkists' main force. Isn't that just propaganda? No, no, no. I heard Minasmar was involved. It was their tower master who defeated the champion of Zarkon. Minasmar? That guild from the Flyers. Yet. Their tower master is quite handsome. That's not the point. She looked up, but the 2 people were already gone. Flyers? Hearing such news, she had to make sure. Had someone else beat her to the punch and destroyed the Zarkists? It was a weird feeling that was spreading in her stomach. There was joy and excitement, but they were bittersweet, mixed with regret and sorrow. She had sworn to take revenge. Although it had been pushed in the background, she still regretted that someone else took that chance away. On the other hand, she needed to make sure, there really were no Zarkists left. Having taken such a blow to her ego, she jumped at the opportunity to do something and distract herself from how miserable she felt. Looking like a down-his-luck adventurer, not much better than a bum, she started looking for the flyer those people had spoken about. It wasn't hard as she quickly found a person distributing them. Despite her appearance, she was greeted with a kind smile and a flyer was pushed in her hands. At the front was the depiction of a pale young man's face, with black hair and a neat black beard, and his finger pointing at the reader. The caption read, Minasmar wants you. She had to admit that he was not ugly. She blushed a little. How long had it been since she had thoughts like this? The flyer itself listed a row of rewards depending on the level and group size. This confused her until she read the cause behind the flyer. Looking for group recruiting reinforcements for the evacuation of Beta District. Beta was being invaded? She eagerly read through the flyer. It had been ages since she heard anything of the current world politics. According to the flyer, Minasmar was working together with the leadership of Y City to promptly and safely evacuate the citizens of Beta District. There were only a few relatively safe paths through the mountains. The task of the recruits was to help the district forces in guiding and protecting the civilians on their way to Epsilon. In exchange, they would be rewarded with items or money, according to their qualifications, number, and contribution. Items included weapons and armor up to the epic rating. This was Seth's answer to changing what he could change. He was no hero who could fight an army, and he was no commander with a loyal army. Due to the long journey, he had forgotten who he was. He was a blacksmith. And he still had a monopoly on high-grade items. He was Mr. Moneybags. Simon said he could not save the world alone. That was right. If he couldn't do it with his own power or influence, he had to pay a price to make others move. Since the leadership of Y City had a vested interest to help anyway, he used his connection with Mike Baker to inform them and strike a weapon deal to make them move quickly. Why Y City and not Delta? Not only was Y City closer, but they also had managed to create vehicles running on magic with technology. It would be a lot faster to evacuate people from Beta to Epsilon. At the same time, he contacted Samuel, the priest of Y City, to make a similar offer to the adventurers of the district. With a reward like epic items, guaranteed by the system church, even the big guilds of Y City moved to work with the government. They had been in a predicament since the government had been developing better and better equipment made with a mix of magic and technology. Faster than they could acquire it from the dungeons. Although the government was not too happy that Seth planned to arm the adventurers, they were in charge of judging the contributions. This gave them ample power to tweak the rewards, which made them agree in the end. Of course, Seth had only made the initial calls and left most of the managing stuff to his trusty partners and employees like Mary and Jane. All he had to do was produce the weapons. It was something he was confident in doing. After reading the flyer, she felt conflicted. Should she join the evacuation efforts and get closer to Minasmar? Or leave for Gamma and check on the Zarkist situation herself? After some deliberation, she chose Gamma. After selling off the materials she collected on her journey, she had more than enough gold to reinvest in equipment and set off for Gamma. The evacuation would take some time. If she was quick, she could still join after she finished her business. Chapter 378. Realization. Seth became quite busy when they finally returned to Minasmar. Although he had left the organizational stuff to others, he still had to look through and approve all of the paperwork involved. Monique had done well in prospering Minasmar while he was gone, which made a deal directly with the leadership of another district much easier. His own connection with Mark Baker also played no small role. What awaited him when he came back was a stern scolding from Mary and Jane. They didn't complain about his reasons, but that he had already made the call and decided on everything before talking it over with them. There were a few reasons for Minasmar to move, besides it being a good deed. It was great to make a name for Minasmar past the borders of Delta. Also, a chance to recruit more talents. He had recruited Samuel to keep an eye out for promising people. There were even some vague plans of maybe opening a branch in Y City. But one of the biggest reasons was that the world kept turning. Seth knew that at some point in the not-so-far future, his pseudo-monopoly would end. Others who could make high-grade items would appear at some point or even had already. A big deal with Y City was a good way to really milk the business one last time and gain a good standing for the future. He could experiment with the materials he got from the Theocracy's stronghold and the stone giant while having a guaranteed buyer. All around, it was a win-win situation. However, the evacuation effort was not the only thing he had to deal with. With the rescue of Drosy and the caravan, he had gotten more than he bargained for. Beside the Tija, there were another 35 people of various races and ages had been kept in the cradle. Seth successfully managed to make Simon take care of those that wanted to leave, or stay in Delta. Minasmar was left with those who wanted to stay, which were the 2 dwarves, an elf, and a group of rabbit beastmen. The blacksmith welcomed the dwarves who decided to stay after they spent time with Whedon. It really wasn't that Seth told him to advertise Minasmar or anything, because the mother was a warrior, and the father was an advanced magic blacksmith. The elf on the other hand had somehow gotten a glimpse of the herb garden and would not leave any more. Unlike with the dwarves, this was completely unplanned, but not unwelcomed. Although the elf had no class directly involved with nature, his racial traits and experience were more than enough to be a great help to Pip and Otto, their pharmacist. As for the rabbit beastmen, Seth had no idea who had made them look at Myanmar as the perfect place to live. The problem was that they did not really bring any useful skills to the table, except for being unwilling to leave. They were originally part of a peddling caravan, not unlike Drosi's. But they were neither warriors nor peddlers. They had been workers for miscellaneous tasks. They also refused to fight or craft. Seth did not feel comfortable with having people stay, just because they refused to leave. It was Jane who came up with an idea and took them under her wings. "Aren't they all quite good looking? And they are quick. We could use some enthusiastic waiters and clerks at the Turquoise Anvil." Seth was not sure if this was what the rabbits wanted, but they seemed very happy when they heard about the safe work environment. The rabbit issue was settled this way. He was glad that they were able to solve it this way. He was also happy that the plans for the evacuation of Beta were going smoothly. But the happiest made him, that Drosy and the other were safe. Seeing them recover and spending time with them and Duho helped him to relax. On the evening of the third day after they came back, and Seth had visited with Finn and Mina to see how they were doing. The Tijak kittens were playing with Ruby, Pip, and her friends. It became quite chaotic when Finn and even the Emuji joined their ranks until finally even Seth and Mina were forced to play. When they were about to leave, Drosy suddenly spoke up to him. "Ah, Seth. Could I talk with you for a moment?" The blacksmith nodded and followed the old cat to his room. Drosy poured a glass of wine for Seth and himself. "What did you want to talk about, Drosy?" Seth asked once they both were seated. "You know, I had a lot of time to think after we left Delta. Especially after our capture." Seth noticed him playing with the sigil ring in his hands. The one Seth had given him. "Drosy. Just listen. Do you still remember, when you offered us to stay at Myanmar? You warned us, but I told you that we wanted to see this world for ourselves. I was confident that we could deal with anything that would come our way. I still had doubts about your words and motives. After what happened in Beta." Drosy fell silent as if to collect his thoughts. They had yet to tell him what even happened there. How had Zen Biologies managed to confine them in the first place? "I wanted to talk about joining Myanmar if that offer from back then still stands." Seth looked at him in surprise. "Oh, of course it still stands. Even though we had all our goods stolen from us." "Drosy, I never care about your goods." "Well, no, that would be a lie. But what I really want are trustworthy people. I trust you, Drosy. And your kin. That is all that matters." "Thank you, Seth. Don't worry about," Seth answered, slightly embarrassed, being thanked for something he had hoped for a long time. "Let's talk about the specifics with Mary and Jane later. You will be closely working with them." With the Tija joining Myanmar and a branch in Y City in the making, the first steps for entering the trade between districts had been made. Orihumas could not reliably use the system church for teleportation because of the randomization, but others like foreign humans and other races could do so just fine. They were not the only ones in Delta, or the first ones, who had the idea to partner with foreigners and the system church to trade with other places. Seth had not looked too deeply into these kinds of things, but he was surprised when he had about it from Jane. There were several branches of big merchant guilds from the Empire in Delta. According to her, the interest in trade with Delta was relatively high, because worlds with a high level of technology usually turned very xenophobic once their initial crisis is averted. That is why those people hurried to get a foot in the door early on. Many of the stores Seth frequented in his free time were actually owned by foreign businessmen. "Maybe we could expand into foreign markets, too," Seth mumbled. He had never thought too much about growing Myanmar before. He wanted to build it as a foundation for him and his friends to make a living in Earth. This was his original thought. But couldn't he have done that in Aura, too? Seth didn't want to miss modern technology, but this wasn't the reason. Ever since he returned, he was too busy surviving and becoming stronger. Now that things were finally calming down. Now that he felt strong enough to survive in this world. It was only now that he realized what this weird feeling he had in Aura was. He had seen some of the worst fates that could await the people of Earth, and it clicked. He simply couldn't look away, but he lacked strength back then. If he really wanted to help, he needed to further grow his strength. However, he was just one person, what could one person do? He needed to further build up the strength of Mina's march. It was Mina's Mar that allowed him to even think of interfering with something like the war in Beta. Despite these urges, Seth stayed a realist. Like Simon had said, choose your battles. The blacksmith had no intention to risk the lives of his people for some altruistic dream. Change what you can change. His solution was quite simple. If Mina's Mar became overwhelmingly strong and capable, no problem would be too big in the future. Chapter 379. New Directions. However, growing Mina's Mar into a force to be reckoned with was all future talk. Right now, there was something bothering Seth that was more pressing than his urge to experiment on artificial life, and it wasn't repairing the gear of the Oath Guard. After several weeks of absence, their armors looked rather dilapidated after the fights in Aura. He left that job to Hone, the dwarven magic blacksmith who had recently joined Mina's Mar with his wife. The dwarf was of advanced level and could also use enchantment. Like a true dwarven blacksmith, he was a total nerd for armor, weapons, and production methods. He gladly took the chance to get his hand on some foreign armor and thoroughly check it out. Recently, Seth had found that some of his items had become redundant. It was all the fault, or blessing, of Kin of Fire. Kin of Fire improved the conversion of mana cost to power output so much, that he felt some of his items were not pulling their weight anymore. To a point that he saw the need to replace them. Primarily his accessories such as the dragon glass rings and earrings. They were already rather old anyway and fit for replacement. Seth also needed a new headgear, for when he did not wear the Helm of Hades. The thought of new equipment also brought up in what direction he wanted to further strengthen himself. There was his second class, the Infernal Skald, but it was more of a support class on its own. It complemented his skills well, depending on the song he learned, but he didn't really know what would improve that. Maybe he could ask Nico Booz to make him a bard's gown that buffed his personality and singing skills? However, this was a question for a second set to switch to, not an augmentation of his current equipment. He scrolled through his skill window when he spotted Earth Affinity Leave 5. This was a passive skill he had gained from the Blessing of Hades, but the only use it had until now was to strengthen his mining skill. It was like Fire Affinity that gave 10% Earth Affinity and resistance to Earth attribute damage per level. At the moment he had no skills that really harnessed this potential or helped level it. However, this was a good starting point. If he could get his hands on a skill scroll for Earth Magic, he could not only add another power to his repertoire, but he could also make equipment to strengthen it. A nice side effect would also be that Earth attribute enchantments would be strengthened even further in the future. Seth nodded to himself. He liked this idea. Following his impulse, to strike the iron while it was hot, he teleported to Delta. It had been weeks since he last took a look in the auction house. There was a great change. The tab for local goods, things from Earth, had been empty for a long time. After his absence, there was a lot more. Seth started looking through them without much expectation but found surprisingly many skill scrolls. There was no scroll for Earth Magic, but he found instrument making for just 1 gold. It was a steal. He had instrument mastery from his second class but never bothered with getting an instrument. Now he could make one himself until he found a better one. The scroll for Earth Magic on the other hand was a whole nother world. Skill scrolls for magic ranged at up to 200 gold coins depending on the magic. Fire magic was even traded at 250 gold coins, only topped by really rare scrolls for light, darkness, or lightning. Beginner Earth magic ranged around 150 gold for a direct purchase. The starting bid was at 100 gold. Mr. Moneybags saw no reason to join an auction, because of a mere 50 gold. He paid another 5 gold for trans-dimensional portage before he finally held the scroll in his hand. Seth immediately returned to his workshop at Mina's Mar, to learn the skills in privacy. First was Instrument Maker, which wedged a bunch of knowledge about the basic techniques and principles. Further, it added a bunch of new blueprints for all kinds of instruments to his blueprint skill. There was a much greater variety than he had expected. He had somehow expected a range of medieval instruments, but there were even more modern ones like saxophones and electric guitars. It somehow destroyed his medieval fantasy, the image he had made for himself during his journey. Next was Earth Magic. It was the first real magic skill Seth learned. The knowledge that flooded his mind was in its basics similar to his pyromancy but less instinctive and more theoretical. One was an ability that gave a direct connection to the element and an instinctive communication, the other was a way to communicate with the elements without this fundamental connection. There was a lot more thinking and calculation involved with learning magic. However, a high affinity was very helpful in this communication. Seth realized that at its peak, magic and elemental abilities would lead to the same result. Before he had planned to maybe get fire magic at some point too, but now he saw that it was not needed. Earth magic, beginner, level 1 gave him access to the basic spell Pebble. Similar to the most basic fire spell Flame, which created a tiny flame to light a campfire, Pebble created a small stone in the caster's hand. There was no real use, except to maybe throw it as a diversion or use a sling to shoot it. He would need to study and master other spells, similar to the ballads and songs. The level of earth magic was a requirement to learn new spells and increase a spell's power. Once a spell was mastered, it would gain the buffs and correction of the magic skill based on the level. At least this was roughly how Seth understood it. The system stayed vague in the amount of information it gave to the user. He would ask Allison, the in-house wizard. To test it out, he followed the skill's instructions and chanted Pebble to create a small stone in his hand. But what appeared was not the so-called pebble, but a well-sized stone the size of a snowball. Was this the effect of Earth Affinity Level 5? He played around with trying to reduce the mana output to regulate the size of the stone until he could make an actual pebble. The spell would when he used too little or too much mana. Interesting. Since the only magic Seth ever used was the automatic magic from his gloves, he never had the option to vary the mana input like this. Seth, are you here? He heard a voice from the entrance. Whedon and Hone, the two dwarves, had come looking for him. What's up? Ah, you are here. Great. We just ate a meal and Link asked us to tell you that he is done. Done? Yeah, with the task you gave him. He said you would know what it means. Also, Hone had some business with you. The newcomer greeted Seth with a bow. Tower Master, I came to request a workshop. I do not mind sharing one with Whedon, but I would find it more relaxing if I had my own. I would like to start working on my own projects. Whedon said it wouldn't be a problem to ask, the dwarfs asked unsurely. Oh, sure, no problem. Did you already finish repairing the equipment of the Oath Guard? Really? Thank you. And yes, I finished maintenance and repairs. I was really impressed with the different kinds of techniques you have used on these items, even though I don't understand all of it. That great. Well, if you excuse me, I will give Link a visit. I will take care of your workshop in the coming days. Seth assured him before he left. Adding more rooms to the underground facilities of Minasmar was no problem at all. The mountain was big enough and all the work was done by the maintenance drones. Now Seth hurried to find Link since he guessed he was done with taking apart those snake corpses. He had been busy in the meantime, but he had waited for him to finish. Chapter 380. Miner's Delight. Seth, can we talk? He met Linry at the canteen on his way to meet Link. Hi, Linry. How have you been so far? Seth had not much time to check on her, after their return. Since she approached him herself, he would take his time to listen to her. Thanks for asking. Life in Minasmar is great. The food is delicious, the people are nice, but... She paused as if unsure how to continue. You can tell me if there is something bothering you. They both sat down at the table where Linry had previously been sitting. It's about what I told you back then, do you remember? I want to help. I don't just want to live off your money, she told him determinedly. Seth vividly remembered the light that had shone in her eyes, back then when she made this decision. I visited the system church the day before yesterday with Simon. I have joined the system and even managed to get a rare class priestess of the fount. But I couldn't get hold of anyone that could give me a task. I know everyone has been busy, that's why I tried to wait at first. Then I realized that isn't the right way. I wish to become stronger and help you, however small that help may be. That's why I suddenly called out to you. A flood of words flowed from her mouth. It seemed like this topic had gnawed at her for some time. Once again, he realized that he was not very good at dealing with human relationships. He apologized a lot lately. On another note, her situation was quite tricky. It was true that Minasmar had nothing like a rookie program. Their focus had been on trustworthy and talented people. Those that joined Minasmar after the tournament had already been above level 20 and they increased their level past 40 since then. There were simply no people in Minasmar that were within her level range. Technically, this was good, since they could just give her a bus ride to a higher level. However, she was a priestess, a healer, and a supporter. She wouldn't be able to raise her skill proficiencies in a party that just laid waste to a dungeon. Linry also wasn't an Orihuma, which was a disadvantage. In the end, Seth came up with 3 options. I believe there are 3 options for you to gain strength. The first would be that you enter our medical wing and gain skill proficiency there while we raise your level slowly. This would be a very safe method, but it could hamper your potential. The other would be that you try to join the system church. You would probably get professional training and a blessing like Mina and the others that could even out the disadvantage in stats. But I have no knowledge of what exactly joining the church as normal person entails. The last option would be to travel to a different world and grow there before you return. I have some acquaintances that could take care of you there. It is probably the most dangerous choice, and you would have to leave Minasmar for an extended period of time. But you would be free to grow and experience that world. Seth gave her these choices, that were uncannily similar to those he had faced himself just over a year ago. A year, that felt like a lifetime. Linri had gone silent, thinking about what Seth had said. Take your time. The choice is all yours. With that, Seth excused himself to look for Link. Oh, you finally came. Link said when Seth found him cooking in the kitchen. There were almost a dozen pots cooking with different fluids and sauces. I came as fast as I could. What are you cooking? The blacksmith asked, looking at the pots with interest. I'm experimenting with the snake meat. It is rare grade meat and a lot of it, but it is hard to make it into a delicious and potent meal. It will take some time to perfect a dish with it, he answered while preparing another pot. Good thing you have more than enough to experiment with it, right? True. Did you really defeat that swamp dragon? I almost broke something when I fell off the corpse while taking it apart. To be fair, I didn't fight it fair and square. Figures. Okay, I'm finished here. This stuff has to cook for a while. Let's go. I put all the stuff in the storage rooms. They ported to the big dismantling room and walked to the adjacent storage rooms. They were filled to the ceiling with boxes that held all the bones, leather, and other materials from the apes and snakes Seth had given him. The foodstuff is already in the kitchen storage and Allison came earlier to get everything useful for alchemy. This is everything fit for blacksmithing and enchanting. Seth was overwhelmed. There were so many boxed, that he had already given up on the thought of putting it in his inventory. Instead, he asked the tower to teleport all the boxes directly to his workshop. Thank you, Link. Don't worry about it. I have to thank you, for all the ingredients, he answered with a smile. Now that Seth had the materials from the snakes, there was one other thing he wanted to do before he started planning his own equipment and experimenting with vessels. It was something only he could do. Take apart the body of Chrysoprase. As it was formed from metals and minerals, this was not the job of a hunter, but that of a miner. He was the only miner in Mina's March. But at the thought of his previous pickaxe taking so much damage from the stone giant's outer shell, he felt it was necessary to craft a new pickaxe first. Thanks to his increased training with singing, he could now even perform normal ballads to some degree. That was why he chose a song he had learned when he started learning with Tord. Like when he forged the angel, this was a dwarven ballad. It could specifically strengthen the damage against stone and was used on tools for mining and masonry. The material he used was the incredibly hard and durable adamantium he had looted at the Theocracy's stronghold. For the enchantments, he could finally test out the new perks that came with the Craftsman tier. The Craftsman tier allowed for the combination and simplification of all previously learned formations. This meant Seth could now link circuits and enchant an item with up to 4 different effects. It also unlocked the use of more abstract and profound effects, like the space arrays he had learned from Alzalsar. In this case, Seth layered the effects of strength enhancement and the pierce enchantment, usually used on weapons. When he thought of the pierce enchantment, he thought of something and checked his enchantment catalog. With his enchantment on level 3, he had also unlocked more divine enchantments. However, what he was looking for was an enchantment he had unlocked with leave 2. It was called Spear of Iapetos. The description just gave a vague introduction to Iapetos himself, one of the titans and brothers of Kronos, who helped pin down Auranos during his dismemberment. But the name implied that it had a piercing effect. Although Seth had already added enchantments, he could not resist testing it out. At worst, he would lose a few hours of work. It was no big deal, compared to the possible gain. The blacksmith chose one of the big ape souls he had collected from the carnage the pseudo-swamp dragon had caused. They were just uncommon, but their size was quite good. Apes, especially big ones, often belonged to the earth attribute. It was no different for these souls. After forging the soul into the shape of the pickaxe, he stretched himself and took a deep breath to get in the right mindset before he started engraving the divine sigil onto it, which looked like a spear piercing the heavens. Iapeto's Spirit Pickaxe. Unique. 1 plus 15% affinity to Earth. 2 active skill, Piercing Strike. 3 active skill, Armor Break. A soul tool imbued with the power of the Titan Iapetos, the Piercer. The names of these skills were not very phenomenal until one saw their effects. Active skill, Piercing Strike, no cost, cooldown, 1 minute. Ignore the opponent's armor and deal 200% true damage to the target. Active skill, Armor Break, no cost, cooldown, 1 minute. On next strike, deal 150% additional damage directly to the opponent's armor. When Seth started strengthening the soul tool and saw the other options that appeared, it became clear that he would not keep this pickaxe forever. They were too good, to not put them on a spear. After adding 15 medium souls, the options stopped changing for the most part. Seth suspected that if he put in enough souls or bigger souls, there would be more changes. However, this was sufficient for a pickaxe he did not plan on keeping. Ding! A synergy has strengthened Piercing Strike. Iapeto's Pickaxe. Unique. Damage, 1400. Durability, 4200. 1 plus 15% affinity to Earth. 2 repairs itself for 5% of dealt damage. 3 plus 50% additional damage on stone. 4 active skill, Piercing Strike. 5 active skill, Armor Break. 6 plus 25% damage to target durability. 7 10% of target armor is ignored. 8 plus 90 strength. A pickaxe imbued with the power of the Titan Iapetos, the Piercer. It is questionable whether the maker, craftsman Smith, should be proud or ashamed of this work. One thing is for sure, any miner would kill to own this tool. Once rumors of the pickaxe's power spread or it plays a role in the user's ascent to a legend, the item might become legendary.